My name is Clara Miller. I am 30 years old and I work as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm here in Chicago. If you had asked me 3 months ago, I would have told you I had the perfect life. A successful husband, a beautiful house in the suburbs, and a baby girl on the way. But perfection is often just a very thin mask hiding a nightmare. When I was 8 months pregnant, my own mother-in-law shoved me down a flight of hardwood stairs. As I lay at the bottom, bleeding and gasping for air, she stood at the top and screamed as if she were the victim of a brutal attack. Later at the hospital, my husband grabbed my hand, dug his fingers into my bruised skin, and whispered that I needed to stop blaming his mother, that my pregnancy hormones were making me paranoid, and that I must have tripped over my own feet. He thought that would be the end of it. He thought I would stay quiet and play the role of the clumsy, hysterical wife. But he did not know that the security camera I had hidden in our upstairs hallway recorded every single word she said before she pushed me. What was on that tape destroyed their entire world. And that sweet, fake smile she always wore vanished forever. Before I tell you exactly what that camera caught and how I brought their house of cards crashing down, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe that the truth always comes to light. Also, I would love to know where you are watching from right now and what time it is there. Drop a comment below and let me connect with you. Now let me take you back to the moment. The illusion shattered completely. Pain was the first thing I registered. It was not just an ache. It was a searing, white-hot tearing sensation that ripped through my lower abdomen and wrapped around my chest like a band of crushed iron. I tried to pull in a breath, but my lungs refused to expand. Every tiny movement sent shards of absolute agony radiating up my spine. The world around me was a nauseating blur of harsh fluorescent lights and the rhythmic, terrifyingly fast beeping of hospital monitors. I blinked against the blinding glare, trying to force my heavy eyes to focus. The sterile smell of iodine and rubbing alcohol burned the inside of my nose. I tried to speak, but my throat was bone dry, producing only a weak, rasping sound. Then, the true panic hit me. My hands flew down to my swollen belly. It was rigid, tight as a drum, and pulsing with a dull, terrifying ache. My baby. Oh dear God, my baby. I tried to sit up, a desperate animal instinct taking over my paralyzed body, but a pair of firm hands gently pressed my shoulders back against the thin, crinkly mattress. Clara, you need to stay entirely still. The voice was calm and professional, but laced with a heavy urgency that made my blood run cold. My vision finally cleared enough to see a doctor standing over me, her face framed by a blue surgical cap. Her eyes were kind, but they were serious, the kind of serious that tells you your life is hanging by a very thin thread. My baby, I croaked out. The words felt like sandpaper scraping against my vocal cords. Please tell me, is my baby okay? The doctor gave a small, reassuring nod, though the tension in her shoulders did not fully relax. Your baby still has a strong heartbeat, Clara. She is a fighter, but we are monitoring both of you very closely right now. I let out a sob of pure relief that instantly turned into a sharp gasp of pain. My chest felt like it was caving in on itself. Try to take shallow breaths, the doctor instructed, checking the clear IV line snaking into the bruised back of my hand. You took a very severe fall. You have 3 fractured ribs on your right side. That is causing the intense pain when you breathe. But more concerningly, you have suffered a mild placental abruption. That means a portion of the placenta has started to detach from the wall of your uterus due to the severe impact of the fall. You are bleeding internally, Clara. We are giving you fluids and medication to try and stabilize the situation, but you are at a very high risk for premature labor. You must remain completely flat and completely calm. A mild placental abruption. Fractured ribs. Internal bleeding. The medical terms echoed in my head, cold and clinical, masking the absolute horror of what they actually meant. I had almost lost my daughter. I had almost died on the floor of my own foyer. The memory of the staircase flashed behind my eyes with sickening clarity, the feeling of my feet slipping off the edge, the terrifying weightlessness of falling backward, the sickening crunch of my bones hitting the polished oak steps one by one. But before the fall, there were the hands. 2 hands planted firmly against my upper chest, pushing with deliberate, malicious force. I was pushed, I whispered. The realization solidified from a hazy nightmare into a cold, hard reality. I looked up at the doctor, my grip tightening desperately on the metal hospital bed rails. Doctor, I did not fall by accident. I was pushed. The doctor's pen paused over her medical chart. She looked down at me, a flicker of professional caution crossing her features. Before she could ask any clarifying questions, the heavy wooden door of the emergency room swung open. Trent rushed into the room. My husband, the man I had promised to spend the rest of my life with. To the outside world, Trent Miller was the absolute picture of modern success. He was a highly paid software engineer, charming, handsome, and always eager to help a neighbor or host a neighborhood barbecue. I was the kind of man who brought me flowers on random Tuesdays and bragged about my accounting promotions to his friends. But more than anything, Trent was a devoted son. His mother, Beverly, had raised him alone after his father passed away, and Trent treated her like a saint walking on earth. Seeing him burst through the hospital door, my first instinct was pure, unadulterated relief. My protector was here, my partner, the father of my child. I reached out a shaking, bruised hand toward him. I fully expected him to rush to my side, to wrap his arms around me, to cry with me over the terrifying near loss of our little girl. But as Trent approached the hospital bed, I noticed his posture. He was not frantic with worry for me. He was rigid. His jaw was locked tight, and his eyes darted nervously toward the doctor before settling on my face. There was no warmth in his expression whatsoever. There was only a simmering, barely concealed irritation. "Trent," I gasped, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks and soaking into the thin hospital pillow. "Trent, she pushed me, your mother pushed me down the stairs." I waited for the shock to register on his handsome face. I waited for the outrage, the fierce protectiveness of a husband, realizing his pregnant wife had just been attacked in their own home. Instead, Trent let out a long, heavy sigh. He stepped closer deliberately, positioning his large frame between me and the doctor, completely blocking her from my view. He took my outstretched hand, but he did not hold it gently. His grip was tight, restrictive, his fingers digging into my knuckles just hard enough to send a warning pulse of pain up my arm. He leaned down, bringing his face inches from mine. When he spoke, his voice was a low, harsh whisper, utterly devoid of any comfort or love. "Stop it, Clara. Stop saying that right now." I stared at him, the remaining air rushing out of my fractured lungs. "What?" "You need to stop blaming my mother for your own clumsiness," he hissed. His eyes narrowed into dark, unfamiliar slits. "You are 8 months pregnant. Your center of gravity is completely off right now. You have been complaining about your swollen ankles and feeling dizzy for weeks. You tripped, Clara. You tripped over your own 2 feet and you fell down the stairs." "No," I pleaded, shaking my head frantically against the mattress. "No, Trent, listen to me. We were arguing at the top of the stairs. She stepped forward and she shoved me." I felt her hands on my chest. I swear to you, I felt her hands push me. Trent squeezed my hand harder, physically silencing me. He glanced back at the doctor over his shoulder, pasting on a tight, apologetic smile that did not reach his eyes. "I am so sorry, doctor. The pregnancy hormones have been making her incredibly emotional and a bit paranoid lately. The shock of the fall is just making her confused about what actually happened." The doctor looked between us, her expression carefully unreadable. "Mr. Miller, your wife has sustained serious trauma today. A placental abruption is not something we take lightly under any circumstances." I know, Trent said smoothly, playing the role of the exhausted but dutiful husband perfectly. "And we are so grateful for your excellent care. But my mother is out in the waiting room right now, having a complete nervous breakdown. She is crying hysterically. She had to watch her pregnant daughter-in-law take a terrible tumble down a flight of stairs, and she is deeply traumatized. The last thing we need right now is Clara making up wild, hurtful accusations because she is embarrassed that she lost her footing." I lay there physically trapped under the weight of his grip and emotionally suffocating under the blanket of his lies. He was rewriting reality right in front of my face. He was turning my attempted murder into a clumsy, embarrassing accident, and he was turning his mother, the woman who had just tried to kill me and his unborn child, into the traumatized victim of the situation. I looked deep into Trent's eyes, desperately searching for the man I loved, the man I thought I knew, inside and out. But there was nothing there. No empathy, no doubt, no concern for the baby fighting for her life inside my womb. There was just a cold, calculating determination to protect his mother at all costs, even at the cost of my life, even at the cost of our daughter's life. You do not understand. I tried one last time, my voice breaking into a pathetic, ragged whisper. Trent, she meant to do it. He leaned in even closer, so close I could smell the stale hospital coffee on his breath. If you ever say that again, he murmured, his tone dropping to a level of pure, terrifying ice. If you ever accuse my mother of something so disgusting again, I will have you committed to a psychiatric ward. Do you understand me? You are acting hysterical. You are not thinking straight. You fell. That is the story. That is the only truth we are discussing. He pulled back, releasing my hand abruptly, as if touching my skin disgusted him. He smoothed the front of his designer button-down shirt and turned back to the doctor with that same polished, fake smile. Is there any paperwork I need to sign to get her admitted to the maternity ward for overnight observation? He asked, completely ignoring the tears streaming into my ears. As the doctor led him out of the room to discuss the admission protocols, I was left entirely alone in the cold, sterile quiet of the emergency room. The physical pain in my fractured ribs and my bleeding abdomen was excruciating, but it was absolutely nothing compared to the psychological agony of what had just transpired. I was utterly alone. The man who was supposed to be my partner in life had just looked me directly in the eye and chosen his abusive mother over our family. He had gaslighted me, threatened my freedom, and silenced my trauma. He thought I was just a weak, dependent, pregnant woman who would eventually cave to his version of reality just to keep the peace in the household. I thought I would swallow the abuse, accept the blame for my own injuries, and go back to playing the perfect, quiet, accommodating wife. But as I lay there, feeling the fragile, determined flutter of my baby's heartbeat against my own, a new feeling began to rise from the toxic ashes of my shattered marriage. It was not despair. It was not fear. It was pure, unadulterated rage. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully buried the truth at the bottom of that staircase. But Trent and Beverly had made one massive, fatal miscalculation. They had completely forgotten about the little black box hidden inside the foliage of the potted ficus plant at the end of the upstairs hallway. They did not know that the camera was motion activated. They did not know that the high-definition microphone picked up every single whisper in that corridor. And they had absolutely no idea that the quiet, accommodating accountant they had just tried to destroy was about to burn their entire lives to the ground. The heavy wooden door closed behind Trent with a soft click that sounded like a vault ceiling shut. I was left alone in the sterile silence of the emergency room. My fractured ribs throbbed with every shallow breath I took. The dull ache in my lower abdomen was a constant, terrifying reminder of how close I had come to losing my baby girl. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to tell the doctor exactly what kind of monsters my husband and his mother really were. But I lay there completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. I did not retort immediately because I was simply too weak physically and emotionally to fight a war I was not prepared for yet. Instead of screaming, I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to the events of that very morning. The sequence of events played out behind my eyelids with sickening clarity. As a senior accountant, numbers have always been my safe haven. I understand logic. I understand balances, ledgers, and exact calculations. When Trent and I got married 3 years ago, I naturally took over managing our household finances. I tracked every dollar that came in and every bill that went out. But marriage is built on trust, or so I naively believed. So when Trent suggested we open a high-yield joint savings account under his primary banking profile to take advantage of an employee benefit at his tech company, I agreed without a second thought. That account was not just a rainy day fund. It held our entire future. My late grandmother, a woman who worked 2 jobs her entire life just to make sure her family was secure, had left me an inheritance of $100,000 when she passed away. It was an incredible gift. We were supposed to use every single cent of that money for a down payment on a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a top-rated school district. I wanted my daughter to grow up with a big backyard and a safe neighborhood. I transferred my grandmother's money into that joint account right after we found out I was pregnant. I trusted Trent to keep it safe. That morning, before the argument before the fall, I had logged into our banking portal to check the monthly interest yield. I was sitting at the kitchen island drinking my decaf coffee, feeling my baby kick against my ribs. I clicked on the savings tab. The number on the screen did not make sense. I blinked thinking the website was glitching. I refreshed the page. The number stayed exactly the same, $0.00. A cold sweat broke out across my neck. I pulled up the transaction history, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the computer mouse. 3 days ago, a single wire transfer had completely drained the account. $100,000 gone. It was transferred to an external account. An account belonging to Beverly Miller. I printed the bank statement right then and there. The paper felt hot in my hands as I grabbed it from the printer. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my chest. I marched out of the kitchen and headed straight for the stairs. Beverly had been staying in our guest room for the past 2 weeks. She claimed she wanted to be close by to help me as I entered the final stretch of my pregnancy. In reality, she spent her days watching television, complaining about my cooking, and treating our home like her personal resort. I found her at the top of the stairs. She was wearing her expensive silk robe, holding a cup of tea, and looking down at me with that perpetual expression of mild disdain she always wore. "Beverly," I said, my voice tight and breathless. "Where is the money?" She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Clara. Keep your voice down. You are giving me a headache." I marched up the steps, gripping the wooden banister for support. I shoved the printed bank statement right into her line of sight. $100,000 was transferred from Trent and my joint account into your personal account 3 days ago. My grandmother's money, Beverly, the money for our house. Where is it? Beverly did not even flinch. She simply reached out, snatched the printed statement right out of my hand, and crumpled it into a ball. She tossed it onto the floor like it was a piece of garbage. "You are so dramatic, Clara," she sneered, her voice dropping into a vicious, condescending register. "Trent transferred that money to me because I needed it. It is his money anyway. I is the man of the house. He makes the real salary." "That is my inheritance," I shouted, feeling a terrifying surge of panic. "It is not his money to give away. You need to return it right now, or I am calling the bank to report fraud." Beverly stepped forward, completely closing the distance between us until she was inches from my face. I was backed up right against the edge of the top step. I could smell her heavy, floral perfume. "You are not calling anyone," she hissed, her eyes wide and wild. "You do not own my son, and you do not own this family. That money is going to pay for things this family actually needs. Not some stupid house in the suburbs, just so you can play the perfect little housewife. Trent knows where his loyalties lie. You are nothing but an incubator." I opened my mouth to scream, to tell her to get out of my house. But before I could form the words, she raised both of her hands. She placed her palms flat against my chest, right below my collarbone. And she pushed. It was not a bump. It was not an accidental nudge. It was a hard, deliberate shove with all of her body weight behind it. I felt my heels slip off the edge of the hardwood step. I remember grabbing wildly at the air, trying to catch the banister, but my fingers closed around nothing. The last thing I saw before I tumbled backward into the empty air was Beverly staring down at me, her face twisted in a mask of pure malice. The jarring sound of the hospital room door swinging open yanked me violently out of the memory. I gasped, my heart racing as if I were falling all over again. I turned my head on the thin pillow, fully expecting to see the doctor returning with my admission papers. Instead, Beverly walked into the room. Right behind her was Chloe, Trent's younger sister. Chloe was 25, completely spoiled, and had never held a real job in her life. She strutted into the trauma room, carrying a massive designer handbag, her high heels clicking loudly against the linoleum floor. She was chewing gum and looking around the emergency room with an expression of absolute disgust, as if my near-death experience was somehow a personal inconvenience to her weekend plans. Beverly rushed forward. The second she saw the young triage nurse standing near the foot of my bed, adjusting my monitor. The vicious, cold-blooded woman who had shoved a pregnant woman down a staircase instantly vanished. In her place was a weeping, terrified, heartbroken mother-in-law. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Oh, my poor sweet Clara!" Beverly wailed dramatically, throwing her hands over her mouth. She rushed to the side of the bed, her eyes swimming with completely manufactured tears. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up. My fractured ribs screamed in protest as I tried to pull away from her, but I had nowhere to go. I was trapped in the bed, hooked up to an IV and a fetal heart monitor. Beverly reached out and stroked my hair. Her touch made my skin crawl. I felt a wave of nausea so strong, I thought I was going to be sick right there on the hospital sheets. "Thank goodness you are awake," Beverly cried loudly, making sure the nurse was watching her every move. "I have been out in the waiting room praying to God since the ambulance took you away. When I saw you trip and fall down those stairs, I thought my heart was going to stop entirely. I just could not get to you in time to catch you. I tried. I really tried." She looked up at the nurse, her face the perfect picture of maternal agony. "Is the baby okay? Please tell me my grandchild is safe." The nurse offered a sympathetic smile, completely falling for the act. "The baby has a strong heartbeat, ma'am. We are monitoring them both very closely. It was a very scary fall, but your daughter-in-law is in good hands." Beverly let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief and patted my head again. I glared up at her, my jaw clamped so tightly my teeth ached. If looks could kill, the glare I gave her would have dropped her dead on the floor. I wanted to scream. I wanted to point at her and tell the nurse to call the police. I wanted to tell them that this woman was a monster. But I looked at Beverly's eyes. Behind the fake tears, her gaze was cold hard and utterly victorious. She was daring me to speak. She knew exactly what Trent had told me. She knew her son had already laid the groundwork, painting me as a clumsy, hysterical, pregnant woman. If I started screaming accusations right now, I would just look exactly like the crazy, paranoid person Trent said I was. Chloe stepped up next to her mother, loudly snapping her chewing gum. "Honestly, Clara, you really need to be more careful," Chloe said, rolling her eyes and checking her reflection in her phone screen. "You are huge right now. You cannot just go running around the house in socks. You totally ruined the entire morning." Mom was so upset she almost fainted. "And Trent has been pacing the waiting room, losing his mind. You really need to watch where you are going next time." I stared at Chloe, taking in her fresh blowout and the expensive designer clothes she was wearing, clothes bought with money she never earned. I thought about my empty savings account. I thought about my grandmother working until her hands bled to leave me that money. I looked back at Beverly. She was still gently stroking my arm, playing the saintly caregiver for the audience. "You just rest now, sweetie," Beverly cooed softly, leaning down close to my ear, so the nurse could not hear. "You just focus on getting better. Trent and I will handle absolutely everything at home. We will take care of the finances, the house, the nursery. You do not need to worry your pretty little head about a single thing. Just be a good girl and rest." The threat was wrapped in sugar, but the meaning was crystal clear. She was telling me she had won. She had my money, she had my husband's loyalty, and she had complete control over the narrative. She believed she had pushed me out of the way both literally and figuratively. A massive wave of pure resentment welled up from the very bottom of my soul. It was a dark, suffocating anger that tasted like metal in my mouth. I wanted to rip the IV out of my arm. I wanted to reach up and strangle her. I wanted to tear that fake smug smile right off her face, but I gritted my teeth. I clamped my mouth shut so hard, I tasted a faint hint of copper. I forced my breathing to remain slow and steady, fighting through the agonizing pain in my broken ribs. I remained entirely silent. I nodded once, letting my eyes droop as if I were simply too exhausted to speak. Beverly gave my arm one final patronizing pat and turned away to chat with Chloe about where they should go grab lunch while I rested. They thought my silence was submission. They thought my lack of protest meant I was defeated, that I had accepted my role as the weak, clumsy victim of an unfortunate accident. They assumed I had surrendered to their version of reality because I had no physical proof of what really happened on that staircase. But as I lay there listening to the steady, reassuring thud of my baby's heartbeat on the fetal monitor, my mind was racing with a terrifying clarity. I was not submitting. I was calculating. I was surviving. I knew I had no proof in my hands at this exact moment. I knew that fighting a war without ammunition in a hospital bed was a guaranteed way to lose everything, including my child. So I let them play their cruel little game. I let Beverly play the saint. I let Chloe play the inconvenienced princess. I let Trent play the concerned, gaslighting husband. I would let them build their arrogant house of cards all the way to the sky. Because what? None of them knew what none of them could possibly fathom as they stood in my hospital room, congratulating themselves on getting away with murder and theft, was that I was an accountant. I lived my entire life relying on hard evidence, permanent records, and undeniable facts, and I knew exactly where to find the proof that would destroy them all. The heavy hospital room door closed as Trent finally left for the night. He claimed he needed to go home to gather some overnight supplies for me and a fresh change of clothes for himself. I knew the real reason. He needed to get back to his mother. He needed to coordinate their story to make absolutely sure they had every single detail of their lie perfectly aligned before the hospital's social workers started asking any difficult questions. As his confident footsteps faded down the long linoleum hallway, the suffocating heavy tension in the room went with him. For the first time all day, I was completely alone. The quiet, rhythmic humming of the fetal monitor next to my bed was my only company. My broken ribs throbbed a steady, agonizing rhythm with every shallow breath I took, but my mind was suddenly sharper than it had been in months. The thick fog of gaslighting and manipulation had temporarily lifted. I needed to act, and I needed to act right now. I pressed the red call button pinned to my thin bedsheet. A few moments later, a young night nurse walked in. Her name tag read Sarah. She had kind, tired eyes, the exact same kind of warm eyes my late grandmother used to have. I knew I had to take a massive risk. I looked at her, letting the genuine raw desperation I felt show clearly on my bruised face. I told her my husband had taken my phone by mistake in his rush to leave, and I desperately needed to check an important email regarding my medical insurance. It was a slight lie, but the absolute panic in my voice was completely real. Sarah hesitated for only a second before reaching into her scrub pocket. She handed me her personal smartphone, telling me she had a round of patient checks to do and would be back in exactly 15 minutes. 15 minutes. That was all the time I had to uncover the truth and secure my future. My hands shook violently as I opened the web browser and typed in the web address for my secure cloud storage account. The password felt unusually long and complicated as my trembling fingers hit the smooth glass screen. While the page slowly loaded over the hospital wireless network, my mind drifted back to the very specific reason that cloud account even existed. No one in my house knew about the tiny camera. Not Trent, and certainly not Beverly. The entire situation started a month ago, shortly after Beverly invited herself to stay in our guest room for the remainder of my pregnancy. At first, it was just small, easily misplaced things. A bottle of expensive French perfume I kept on my bathroom vanity simply vanished into thin air. Then, a pair of delicate pearl earrings my father had given me for my college graduation disappeared from my velvet jewelry box. When I brought the missing items up to Trent, he brushed my concerns off immediately. He told me that pregnancy brain was making me forgetful and that I probably misplaced them while nesting and cleaning the house. But I am a senior accountant. My entire life and career are built on keeping meticulous track of assets and finding missing numbers. I do not misplace things. 2 weeks later, a vintage gold locket that belonged to my grandmother went missing from my top dresser drawer. I was utterly devastated, but I also knew I was not crazy. I knew exactly where I had left it. I realized with sickening clarity that someone was actively stealing from me in my own home. Since Beverly was the only other person in the house during the day while Trent and I worked at our offices, the suspect list was incredibly short. But I needed undeniable concrete proof before I could confront my husband about his precious saintly mother. I went online and ordered a high-definition, discreet nanny camera. It was no bigger than a standard board game piece equipped with sensitive motion sensors, infrared night vision, and a highly advanced audio recorder. I hid it deep inside the thick, artificial foliage of a tall, potted plant that sat on a decorative console table in our second-floor hallway. That plant was positioned perfectly. It had a clear, unobstructed panoramic view of the master bedroom door, the guest room door, and the very top of the main wooden staircase. I set the camera to automatically upload all motion-triggered video recordings directly to a secure private cloud server. I fully intended to catch a petty, greedy thief stealing my grandmother's jewelry. I never in my wildest nightmares imagined I would catch an attempted murder. The cloud storage dashboard finally appeared on the bright screen of the borrowed phone, illuminating my dark hospital room. My heart hammered against my bruised ribs so violently I thought the medical monitors would start sounding a frantic alarm. I navigated through the digital folders with a dry mouth. There were dozens of short video clips from the past few weeks, mostly just mundane. Footage of Trent walking to the bathroom in the middle of the night, or Beverly snooping around the hallway when she thought she was entirely alone in the house. I scrolled quickly past all of those useless moments. I specifically looked for the digital timestamp from this morning, 9:15 in the morning, the exact time my entire life had been violently turned upside down. There it was. A video file labeled with today's date exactly 3 minutes long. My thumb hovered over the glowing play button. A sudden, overwhelming wave of pure terror washed over me. Once I watched this footage, there was absolutely no going back. The comfortable illusion of my happy marriage would be permanently shattered. But staying in the dark meant living in a house with a woman who actively wanted me dead. I tapped the screen and pressed play. The video started playing immediately. The image quality was incredibly sharp, perfectly capturing the bright morning sunlight streaming through the large hallway window. The audio was crystal clear, picking up the quiet ambient sounds of the suburban house. First, I saw myself march aggressively into the camera frame. I looked absolutely furious, clutching the printed bank statement tightly in my right hand. Then Beverly appeared at the top of the stairs wearing her expensive floral silk robe and holding her delicate porcelain teacup. The camera angle caught her perfectly in profile, illuminating every line of her smug face. I watched our confrontation play out like a silent, horrified observer to my own personal tragedy. I heard my own voice shaky, but demanding, asking where the $100,000 had gone. I watched Beverly snatch the paper from my hands and throw it onto the wooden floor with utter disdain. But this time, watching the interaction from an outside perspective, I saw something terrifying that I had completely missed in the chaotic heat of the moment. I saw the pure, calculated, venomous hatred in Beverly's eyes. I saw her glance quickly down the long, steep staircase exactly as if she were measuring the physical distance to the bottom floor. Then, the sensitive audio microphone picked up her voice. Hearing her speak those words again sent a fresh, paralyzing chill straight down to the marrow of my bones. Her words were not driven by sudden panic or a momentary emotional loss of temper. Her tone was measured, icy, and completely deliberate. "This house is mine." Beverly's recorded voice hissed through the tiny phone speaker, dripping with absolute malice. "Trent is mine. I took that money to pay for Chloe's wedding. And I will raise this child if you do not survive this fall." The sheer concentrated evil of those spoken words physically paralyzed me. I had to stop the video and rewind it just to make sure I had heard her correctly. She had just openly admitted to stealing my entire financial inheritance to fund a lavish, ridiculous party for her spoiled daughter. But far worse than the massive financial theft was her horrific intention for my unborn baby. She did not just want my grandmother's money. She wanted my child. She wanted to erase me from the family picture, completely remove me as an obstacle, and take over as the mother to my daughter. The video continued playing on the small screen. I watched in absolute breathless horror as Beverly raised both of her hands. I saw her plant her palms flat and hard against my upper chest, and then, with a brutal, forceful, incredibly violent thrust, she pushed me. I watched my recorded self violently lose balance. I saw the sudden terrified shock register on my face as my feet slipped rapidly off the edge of the top wooden step. I disappeared completely from the camera's frame, tumbling backward into the empty void of the stairwell. The loud, sickening thuds of my heavy body hitting the hardwood stairs echoed brutally through the phone speaker, followed immediately by my own muffled, agonizing groans of pain from the floor below. But the hidden camera remained fixed firmly on Beverly. I watched her stand motionless at the top of the stairs for 3 full seconds. She calmly looked down at my broken, bleeding body at the bottom of the steps. She did not gasp in shock. She did not rush down the stairs to help me. She did not immediately reach for a phone to call an ambulance. She simply stood there, reached up with a steady hand, and casually adjusted the collar of her silk robe, completely and utterly unbothered by the fact that she had just violently pushed a heavily pregnant woman down a steep flight of stairs. Then, a terrifying psychological switch flipped inside her head. The cold, calculating monster vanished in a split second. Beverly suddenly threw her hands over her face and let out a blood-curdling theatrical scream that pierced the audio feed. She began wailing loudly, screaming my name over and over, crying out frantically for help, perfectly and seamlessly acting out the role of a traumatized, devastated witness to a terrible, tragic household accident. I sat in the hospital bed staring at the frozen frame of Beverly's fake tears on the smartphone screen. My breathing was ragged and shallow. The physical pain in my chest was completely overshadowed by the monumental weight of the truth. My husband had not just blindly believed his mother over me, he had actively silenced me. He had threatened to lock me in a psychiatric ward to protect a woman who had just confessed on tape to stealing my inheritance and attempting to murder me so she could claim my baby. They thought they had committed the perfect crime. They thought my money would simply become their money and my child would simply become their child. I carefully downloaded the entire video file, saving a backup copy to a secure hidden folder in my cloud drive. I erased the browser history on the borrowed phone just as the young nurse walked back into the room. I handed the device back to her, thanked her profusely, and laid my head back against the pillow. I closed my eyes, but I was not sleeping. I was wide awake, and I finally had the ultimate weapon. The video playing on the small smartphone screen was not just a horrifying, irrefutable record of an attempted murder. It was a direct, unapologetic confession of a massive financial motive. Beverly had screamed into the hidden microphone that she took my money to pay for Chloe's wedding. She had proudly claimed that my house and my husband belonged exclusively to her. I am a senior accountant. I spend my entire professional life tracking missing pennies for massive corporations and untangling complex financial discrepancies. I know better than anyone that large sums of money never simply vanish into thin air. Money always leaves a paper trail. It always leaves undeniable digital footprints. And Trent, for all of his software engineering intelligence and his arrogant confidence, had severely underestimated me. He thought I was just a docile pregnant wife who would never dare to look behind the heavy curtain of our joint finances. He honestly believed his mother's brutal, violent push would either kill me or terrify me into a state of permanent, unquestioning submission. I knew I needed professional, ruthless legal help immediately, but I could not use my own cell phone even when Trent eventually brought it back to the hospital. I knew he would absolutely monitor my call logs and read my text messages to ensure I was not reaching out to the authorities. I had to be infinitely smarter than them. I had memorized the phone number of my oldest and most trusted friend from college. Her name was Jessica. We had shared a tiny, cramped dorm room for 4 years. Today, she was one of the most brilliant, aggressive family and estate law attorneys in the entire city of Chicago. She knew Trent perfectly well. She had never quite liked him, always warning me that he was a little too polished, a little too eager to please his overbearing mother. I desperately wished I had listened to her warnings back then. I reached across the hospital bed and picked up the heavy plastic receiver of the room's landline. My bruised hands were still shaking so badly that I misdialed her number twice before finally pressing the correct sequence of buttons. The phone rang 3 times in the dark. When Jessica finally answered, her voice was thick and heavy with sleep. I glanced at the digital clock on the wall and realized it was well past 2 in the morning. "Jessica," I whispered, keeping my voice as low and steady as physically possible. "It is Clara. Please do not hang up. I am in the hospital right now. I need your help, and I need you to listen to me very carefully without interrupting. The fog of sleep instantly vanished from her voice, replaced by razor-sharp alertness. Clara, what is wrong? What hospital are you at right now? I am getting my car keys and coming directly to you. I quickly told her not to come. If Trent or Beverly suddenly showed up and saw my formidable attorney friend sitting by my bed, they would instantly know I was building a defensive case. I told her I was currently sending an encrypted email from a secure cloud server directly to her private work address. I explained that the email contained a downloaded video file from a hidden nanny camera they did not know existed. I quietly described exactly what was on that video. I heard a sharp, horrified gasp on the other end of the line, followed by a heavy, absolutely stunned silence. Did Trent do this to you? Jessica finally asked, her professional tone turning into pure protective ice. No, I replied, hot tears leaking out of the corners of my eyes and rolling down my temples into my hair. His mother pushed me down the stairs, but Trent is aggressively covering it up. He is actively gaslighting me. He told the emergency room doctors that my pregnancy hormones made me clumsy and that I tripped over my own feet. Jessica, she took my entire inheritance, the $100,000 my late grandmother left me for our new house. Beverly stated on the tape that she took the money to fund Chloe's lavish wedding. I need you to look into our finances immediately. Trent manipulated me into putting that money into a joint savings account under his primary banking profile. I need to know exactly what my husband did behind my back. Give me your banking routing numbers and your social security number right this second, Jessica ordered without hesitation. I am waking up my private forensic investigator right now. We are going to track every single dime that left that account. I will call you back on this exact hospital room line as soon as I have the complete financial picture. Do not let Trent know you suspect anything at all. You must play the victim perfectly. Play the confused, recovering, emotional wife. I will aggressively handle everything else. I hung up the heavy plastic receiver and lay back against the stiff hospital pillows. The wait was absolutely agonizing. Every single minute that ticked by on the wall clock felt like an eternity. I listened to the rhythmic, comforting thumping of my baby's heartbeat on the fetal monitor. It was a strong, steady sound that gave me the profound courage to keep breathing through the sharp, stabbing pain in my fractured ribs. I thought about my grandmother. She had worked 2 grueling jobs as a diner waitress and a neighborhood seamstress for 40 years. She saved her hard-earned money in old coffee cans hidden in her closet before she ever trusted a commercial bank. She had handed me that generous check on her deathbed and instructed me to buy a beautiful, safe home for my future children. She desperately wanted me to have the financial security she never got to experience. And Trent had taken that sacred security and handed it directly over to his malicious, greedy mother. As a dedicated accountant, the deception stung on a profound professional level, but as a devoted wife and a soon-to-be mother, it completely and utterly shattered my soul. I had cooked warm dinners for this man every night. I had washed his clothes. I had rubbed his tired shoulders after long, stressful days at his tech office. I had carried his child for 8 exhausting months, and while I was busy building a loving foundation for our family, he was busy maliciously dismantling it. He was actively colluding with the very woman who wanted to violently replace me. 2 grueling hours later, the hospital phone on my bedside table finally rang. The loud, shrill sound made me jump, sending a painful jolt through my abdomen. I snatched the receiver off the cradle before it could ring a second time. Jessica, I whispered urgently into the plastic mouthpiece. Tell me everything. Clara, I need you to stay completely calm and breathe, Jessica said. Her tone was strictly professional, the exact measured voice she used when delivering catastrophic legal news to a vulnerable client. But beneath that tight professionalism, I could clearly hear the deep, simmering anger of a fiercely protective friend. I have the entire financial picture in front of me right now. Clara, it is so much worse than we ever thought. A cold, heavy knot formed deep in the pit of my stomach. Tell me exactly what he did, I demanded. Trent did not just transfer the $100,000 to Beverly in a single transaction. Jessica explained slowly, laying out the horrific facts. He systematically drained your joint savings account over the course of 3 days last week. He moved the money in smaller, staggered increments to deliberately avoid triggering the bank's automatic fraud alerts for large, unusual digital transfers. Every single dollar of your grandmother's inheritance was funneled directly into a private, untraceable checking account held solely in Beverly's name. I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling a fresh, overwhelming wave of physical nausea wash over me. So she took all of it, every last cent. That is just the very beginning, Clara. Jessica took a deep, audible breath through the phone. Trent also took out a home equity line of credit against your house, a HELOC. I took out an additional $200,000 against the built-up equity of your home. My heart stopped beating for a terrifying, agonizing second. That is completely impossible. I argued, my rational accounting brain instantly rejecting the horrifying information. My legal name is firmly on the deed to that house. We bought that property together. He cannot legally execute a home equity line of credit without my physical signature and a licensed notary public present in the room. I never signed a single document regarding our equity. He forged your signature, Clara. Jessica's words dropped like massive, suffocating boulders onto my chest. We just pulled the digital loan documents from the county registry. He used an online notary service that his tech company frequently contracts with for remote business. He secretly uploaded a scanned copy of your state driver's license and somehow bypassed the visual identity check himself, using his software credentials. He legally bound you to $200,000 of high-interest debt without you ever knowing a single thing about it. I literally could not pull air into my lungs. The sterile white walls of the hospital room felt like they were rapidly closing in on me. He forged my legal signature. He secretly mortgaged the safe home where my baby was supposed to grow up. Why? I asked, my voice cracking into a pathetic, shattered sob. Why on earth would he need that massive amount of money? He makes an incredible salary at his firm. We do not have any outstanding debt. Because his mother does, Jessica revealed, delivering the final, absolute crushing blow to my reality. We ran a quiet, expedited background check on Beverly using a private investigator. She has massive, staggering underground gambling debts. She has been visiting unregulated underground casinos and illegal high-stakes poker games across the state for several years. She owes incredibly dangerous amounts of money to people who do not use standard collection agencies, Clara. They use physical violence. She was completely desperate and out of time. The scattered, confusing pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into perfect place. The sudden, unannounced visits to our home. The strange, hushed phone calls Beverly would take out in the backyard, where she thought no one could possibly hear her. The missing expensive jewelry from my bedroom dresser. She was drowning in toxic gambling debt. And she was stealing my personal belongings to pawn them for quick cash. And what about the rest of the money, I asked, feeling physically sick to my stomach. What about the rest of the $200,000 he stole from our equity? The wedding, Jessica confirmed with a sharp edge of disgust in her voice. Chloe's upcoming, ridiculously lavish wedding at the Silver Pines Country Club. You know the exact venue. The location alone costs $50,000 just to reserve the main ballroom for a single evening. Beverly proudly promised Chloe the wedding of the century to impress her wealthy future in-laws. She arrogantly committed to paying for the gourmet catering, the custom designer dress, the expensive imported flowers, absolutely everything. She made massive financial promises she could not ever keep, and she fully expected your husband to illegally bail her out. And he did. I whispered into the dark, empty room. He bailed her out with my grandmother's lifelong savings and the secure roof over my head. He actively colluded with her, Clara. Jessica's voice was fierce, protective, and completely unwavering. Trent knew exactly what he was doing every step of the way. He sat back and watched his mother steal your inheritance. He actively participated in severely defrauding you by forging your signature on a binding federal loan document. He intentionally indebted you to save his mother from her violent gambling creditors and to fully fund his spoiled sister's country club fantasy. He completely drained your financial existence dry. And when you figured out the very first part of the theft this morning by checking the bank statement, Beverly realized she was about to be totally exposed. She pushed me to permanently silence me. I realized aloud the absolute chilling horror of the situation settling deep into my bones. She wanted me dead, so I could not report the missing $100,000 to the bank authorities. And Trent willingly went along with the horrific hospital cover-up, because if I died from the fall, he would automatically inherit the house, collect the massive life insurance policy, and he would never have to explain the forged loan documents to anyone. I would just be his tragically deceased, clumsy wife. Exactly. Jessica agreed, her tone grim. They maliciously created a scenario where they win absolutely everything and you lose your life. But they did not know about the hidden nanny camera. That specific video is not just concrete proof of aggravated assault and attempted murder, Clara. It is the golden key to unraveling a massive, highly coordinated financial fraud scheme. Trent has committed a severe federal crime by forging your signature on a financial loan document across state lines. Beverly has committed a violent felony assault. We have them both dead to rights on multiple catastrophic charges. What exactly do we do now? I asked. My hot tears had completely stopped falling. The profound sadness was gone. The heartbreaking grief over my ruined marriage was entirely gone. All that remained in my mind was a cold, calculating mathematical determination to absolutely destroy the people who had tried to destroy me and my daughter. We play their sick game, Jessica instructed carefully. You cannot let them know that you know everything. You must become the absolute picture of the traumatized, agreeable, submissive wife. You let Trent truly think he successfully manipulated you into believing you tripped on those stairs. You let Beverly think she completely got away with her attack. You go back to that house. You let them feel victorious, arrogant, and incredibly comfortable. And while they are busy planning Chloe's ridiculous luxury wedding with your stolen money, I am going to quietly build a legal case so completely watertight that neither of them will ever see the light of day as free citizens again. I will freeze your remaining personal accounts immediately to protect whatever small amount of money is left untouched. I am preparing the extensive divorce filings, the major fraud reports for the federal banking authorities, and a comprehensive, undeniable evidence package for the district attorney regarding the physical assault. But we strike when they least expect it. We wait until they are completely and publicly exposed. I understand, I told her. My voice did not shake or tremble anymore. Thank you, Jessica. You are going to survive this nightmare, Clara, she promised fiercely before hanging up the phone, and they are going to lose absolutely everything. I placed the heavy hospital phone back onto its base. The room was perfectly, hauntingly silent again, save for the steady, reassuring heartbeat of my baby girl on the monitor. I rested my hand gently over my bruised, swollen belly. I closed my eyes and vividly pictured Trent and Beverly sitting together in my beautiful living room, drinking my coffee, laughing about how easily they had handled the situation. They genuinely thought I was a naive, weak woman who would blindly accept their manipulative lies. They thought they had successfully drained my bank accounts and secured their own luxurious futures entirely at my physical and financial expense. But they had just foolishly declared war on a woman who spent her entire life meticulously balancing books and ensuring every single outstanding debt was paid in full. They owed me my health, my deep trust, and my beloved grandmother's legacy. I was going to systematically collect on every single debt they owed. I was going to let them walk right into the massive, glittering, expensive trap of Chloe's upcoming wedding. I was going to let them put on their expensive, tailored suits and designer silk dresses paid for with my stolen money. And then, in front of every single person they desperately wanted to impress, I was going to hand them the ultimate devastating bill. The pale morning light crept through the horizontal blinds of my hospital room. It painted harsh gray lines across the sterile white blanket, covering my bruised legs. I had not slept a single second. My mind had been spinning in endless circles all night, completely consumed by the horrifying truth my attorney Jessica had uncovered. My husband, the man I had vowed to spend my rest of my life with, had secretly drained my entire inheritance. He had forged my signature to place a massive debt on our family home just to pay off his mother's illegal gambling debts and fund his sister's ridiculous country club wedding. And his mother, Beverly, had shoved me down a steep flight of hardwood stairs, fully intending to kill me, so she could claim my baby and my money. As the hospital woke up around me, with the sounds of rattling carts and nurses chatting in the hallway, the absolute gravity of my situation settled onto my chest like a block of solid concrete. If I let my anger take control right now, if I screamed the truth the moment Trent walked back through that door, I would lose absolutely everything. I was physically trapped in a hospital bed, barely able to breathe through my fractured ribs without agonizing pain. I was 8 months pregnant and terrified of going into premature labor due to the placental abruption. Trent was fully physically capable and legally empowered to make my life a living hell. If I accused him of fraud and his mother of attempted murder, without the authorities already moving in to secure the assets, he would immediately know I had proof. He was a software engineer. I was brilliant with technology. If he suspected I had a hidden nanny camera, he would rush back to the house, destroy the device, wipe the cloud servers, and erase every single digital footprint of his financial crimes before Jessica could secure the legal subpoenas. Even worse, if I confronted them now, he could manipulate the hospital staff into believing I was suffering from severe pregnancy-induced psychosis. He had already laid the groundwork for that lie the night before. He could have me committed to a psychiatric ward. He could take my newborn daughter the moment she entered the world, leaving me locked in a hospital with no money, no home, and no child. I could not afford the luxury of righteous anger. I had to swallow my pride, my dignity, and my absolute revulsion. I had to become the exact woman they wanted me to be. I had to play the role of the clumsy, hysterical, submissive, and deeply apologetic wife. I needed them to feel so incredibly victorious and secure in their deception that they would let their guard down completely. I needed them to focus entirely on planning Chloe's lavish wedding, completely unaware that the money they were spending was about to become the very evidence that would send them both to federal prison. It was a terrifying psychological tightrope to walk, but I was a mother fighting for her child's future. There is no limit to the pain a mother will endure to protect her baby. I took a slow, shallow breath, feeling the sharp sting in my ribs, and began mentally preparing my mask. I practiced the weak, confused expression I would need. I practiced making my voice sound small and fragile. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the heavy wooden door to my room slowly pushed open. Trent walked in first, wearing a perfectly pressed casual button-down shirt and holding a large paper cup of gourmet coffee. He looked completely refreshed, as if he had just slept a solid 8 hours in his comfortable bed. Right behind him was Beverly. She was holding a large insulated thermos and a small plastic bag from an expensive local bakery. She had taken the time to apply her full face of makeup, her hair perfectly blown out, looking absolutely nothing like a woman whose daughter-in-law was fighting for her life in a trauma ward. The sheer audacity of their calm, collected demeanor made the bile rise in my throat. I had to dig my fingernails into my own palms under the hospital blanket to stop myself from physically shaking with rage. "Oh, good. You are awake," Trent said. His voice was smooth and casual, lacking any genuine warmth or concern. He walked over to the side of the bed, placing his coffee on the small rolling table. He did not kiss my forehead. He did not reach for my hand. He simply stood there, looking down at me with those calculating, assessing eyes, trying to gauge my mental state. "Mom made you some of her homemade chicken soup," he added, gesturing toward Beverly. "We figured the hospital food would be terrible and you need your strength." Beverly stepped forward, bringing the thermos to the bedside table. She looked at me, her eyes completely devoid of sympathy. She was studying my face, waiting to see if the fragile, clumsy wife from last night was still intact, or if the woman who knew the truth was about to surface. "Good morning, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I brought you something warm. You must be feeling so sore today, after your terrible little accident." This was the moment. This was the ultimate test of my resolve. I forced my lower lip to tremble. I let my eyes well up with hot, stinging tears. I looked away from her, letting my gaze drop to my hands, resting on the blanket exactly like a scolded child. "Trent," I whispered, making my voice crack perfectly. Trent. I am so sorry. Trent shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing slightly. Sorry for what, Clara? I took a ragged, shallow breath, ensuring my fractured ribs made my voice sound appropriately pained and breathless. I am so sorry for what I said last night. I sobbed, letting the tears spill over my eyelashes and roll down my cheeks. I was just so scared. The pain was so intense, and the doctors were rushing around, and I was so terrified of losing the baby. I was not thinking straight. My mind was just completely scrambled by the fall. I slowly turned my head to look directly into Beverly's eyes. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to spit in her face. Beverly, I am so incredibly sorry, I cried, letting my voice break into a pathetic wail. I cannot believe I said those awful things about you pushing me. I know you would never do something like that. I know you were just trying to help me. I was just feeling so dizzy, and my ankles were so swollen, just like Trent said. I must have lost my balance on the top step. I tripped over my own clumsy feet. Please forgive me for causing such a horrible scene and scaring you so badly. I ruined the entire morning. The heavy silence in the hospital room stretched out for 5 agonizing seconds. I kept my head bowed, my shoulders shaking with manufactured sobs waiting for their verdict. Slowly, I looked up through my tears. The transformation on Beverly's face was absolutely chilling. The cautious, defensive tension completely melted away from her features. Her shoulders relaxed. A slow, deeply satisfied smirk spread across her lips. It was not a smile of relief that her daughter-in-law was okay. It was the triumphant, arrogant smile of a predator who realized the prey had completely given up the fight. She looked across the hospital bed at Trent. They locked eyes, and she gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent, victorious communication that made my blood run cold. She was telling him that the crisis was averted. The dumb, naive wife had bought the lie hook, line, and sinker. The inheritance money was safe. Chloe's luxury wedding was fully funded. Their horrific secret was securely buried at the bottom of the staircase. Trent let out a heavy, dramatic sigh of relief. He finally reached out and patted my shoulder, his touch feeling like ice against my skin. See, I told you, Mom. Trent said, his tone dripping with condescending validation. I told you, it was just the pregnancy hormones and the shock of the fall talking. She did not mean any of those crazy accusations. She just got confused. It is totally normal for women in her condition to act a little hysterical after a trauma. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of pity and superiority. We forgive you, Clara. We know you are not in your right mind right now. We are just glad you finally realized what actually happened. You really need to be more careful moving forward. You could have killed our baby with your clumsiness. The psychological pain of hearing him weaponize my unborn child against me was excruciating. He was using the baby he had allowed his mother to endanger as a tool to further break my spirit. He was standing there, a willing accomplice to my attempted murder, lecturing me about maternal responsibility. My fingernails dug so deeply into my palms that I felt the skin begin to break. But I kept my face arranged in a mask of weeping gratitude. Thank you, I whispered, wiping my eyes with the back of my bruised hand. Thank you both for being so understanding. I promise I will be more careful. Of course you will, sweetie. Beverly cooed, her voice practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. She unscrewed the lid of the thermos, pouring the steaming chicken soup into a small plastic bowl she had brought in the bag. Now, you just sit back and let me feed you. You need your strength to recover from your little tumble. She brought a plastic spoon filled with warm broth to my lips. Looking into the eyes of the woman who had brutally shoved me toward my death just 24 hours ago, and having to physically open my mouth to accept the food she was offering, was the most profoundly degrading experience of my entire life. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to knock the bowl out of her hands. The broth tasted like absolute ash in my mouth. I had to force myself to swallow, to smile weakly, to whisper my thanks. I was eating soup fed to me by my attempted murderer, while my traitorous husband watched with an approving nod. This is delicious, Beverly. I lied, my voice shaking, with the monumental effort of suppressing my pure rage. Thank you for taking the time to make this for me. You are family. Clara, she smiled, her eyes glittering with dark triumph. And family always takes care of each other. We are going to take such good care of you and that little baby when you get home. You will not have to lift a single finger. Trent and I will manage all the finances, all the household decisions, everything. You just focus on resting your clumsy feet. She was telling me my life was over. She was outlining the prison she had built for me. I would be a captive in my own home, stripped of my financial control, stripped of my independence, forced to live under the absolute authority of the two people who had conspired to destroy me. They were completely convinced they had broken me. As I swallowed another spoonful of her soup, I looked down at my hands resting on the white blanket. I let them see a defeated, broken woman. But inside my mind, I was already drafting the federal fraud reports. I was calculating the exact prison sentences for aggravated assault and interstate financial deception. I was mentally coordinating with Jessica to ensure that the moment the trap sprang shut, there would be absolutely no escape for either of them. The psychological torture of this hospital room was temporary. The justice that was coming for them would be permanent. I smiled at Trent, a weak, pathetic smile that perfectly completed my performance. "I love you, Trent," I whispered. "Thank you for staying by my side." He smiled back, arrogant and completely blind to the inferno raging behind my eyes. "I will always be here to guide you, Clara. Just listen to me from now on, and everything will be perfectly fine." I closed my eyes, letting the tears of fake gratitude slip out one last time. They had no idea that the clumsy, paranoid wife they were currently mocking was about to become the architect of their absolute ruin. Later that afternoon, the heavy wooden door to my hospital room swung open again. The sterile smell of iodine in the air was suddenly replaced by the sharp scent of Trent's expensive cologne. He walked into the room, carrying a thick stack of printed papers in his hand. He did not look like a man whose wife and unborn child had just survived a terrifying trauma. He looked like a man preparing to deliver a disciplinary lecture. He pulled a gray plastic visitor chair right up to the edge of my bed and sat down with a loud, theatrical sigh. He ran his hand through his perfectly styled hair, playing the role of the exhausted, overburdened provider. Trent dropped the stack of papers onto my rolling tray table. The loud slap of the paper against the plastic made my fractured ribs ache. He pointed a finger at the top sheet, his jaw clenched tight. "Clara, we need to have a very serious conversation about our finances," he said, his voice dripping with condescending disappointment. "I just got off the phone with the hospital billing department and our insurance provider. This little accident of yours is going to cost us an absolute fortune." I looked down at the papers. They were covered in rows of numbers, medical billing codes, and estimated out-of-pocket expenses. "The insurance is fighting the coverage for the emergency trauma team because the primary doctor who treated you was technically out of network," Trent explained smoothly, lying right to my face without missing a single beat. "We have to pay the massive deductible immediately, plus 20% of the total room and board costs for every single night they keep you here. The total out-of-pocket estimate is already well over $15,000, and that does not even include the neonatal monitoring they are doing for the baby." I stared at the numbers printed on the page, and my sharp accounting brain instantly recognized the total fabrication. I have spent my entire professional career auditing massive financial records and understanding complex corporate insurance policies. I knew for an absolute fact that hospital billing departments do not generate comprehensive, itemized estimates within 24 hours of an emergency admission. I also knew our premium health insurance policy had a strict out-of-pocket maximum of $4,000 for the entire calendar year. The document he was showing me was either a completely unrelated estimate he had demanded the front desk printout, or a total misrepresentation of standard hospital protocol. He was deliberately trying to terrorize me with fake debt. He wanted me to feel guilty, financially ruined, and completely dependent on him. He wanted to reinforce the narrative that my clumsiness was destroying our family's stability. I was creating a massive financial crisis to keep me distracted and to justify the fact that all of our money was completely missing if I ever tried to check our accounts again. We simply do not have this kind of liquid cash lying around anymore. Clara Trent continued leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. We are going to have to drain whatever small savings we have left, just to keep the collection agencies away. We are going to have to severely tighten our belts. This means no more expensive baby clothes, no more nursery renovations, and absolutely no more careless mistakes. You have to start watching where you are going. You cannot afford to trip down the stairs again. Your clumsiness is literally bankrupting us. The psychological pain of having to listen to this man weaponize my own trauma against me pushed my internal conflict to its absolute peak. He had already stolen my $100,000 inheritance to pay off his mother's gambling debts. He had already illegally mortgaged our house for another $200,000 to fund his spoiled sister's country club wedding. And now he had the absolute audacity to sit beside my hospital bed and blame me for a fake medical debt just to keep me under his thumb. I forced hot stinging tears to well up in my eyes. I made my lower lip tremble perfectly. I looked at him with wide, terrified eyes, playing the exact role of the broken, submissive wife he desperately needed me to be. I am so sorry, Trent. I cried, my voice shaking with manufactured shame. I had no idea it would cost this much. I feel so incredibly guilty. Please do not be angry with me. I promise I will make it up to you. I will work overtime the second my maternity leave is over. I will do whatever it takes to fix this mess. Trent's rigid shoulders visibly relaxed. The deep, calculating tension in his face melted into an expression of arrogant satisfaction. He reached out and patted my leg through the thin hospital blanket. Do not cry, Clara, he said, his voice taking on a sickeningly sweet paternal tone. I am not angry, I am just stressed. I am the man of this house, and it is my job to clean up the messes. I will handle the hospital billing department. I will figure out a way to pay for this disaster. You just focus on resting and following my lead. I will take care of absolutely everything from now on. He stood up from the chair and stretched his arms over his head. Then he patted the front pockets of his designer trousers and let out an annoyed groan. My cell phone battery is completely dead, he muttered, looking around the room for a charger. I need to check an incredibly important email from my project manager. Let me borrow your phone for a minute, Clara. I need to log into my web portal. My heart slammed against my bruised chest, but I did not let a single ounce of panic show on my face. This was a critical test. He did not care about a work email. He wanted to inspect my phone. He wanted to meticulously search my digital footprint to ensure I had not texted my parents, called the local police, or reached out to a lawyer. He needed absolute confirmation that his gaslighting had worked and that I was completely isolated in my trauma. Of course, honey, I said weakly, pointing a trembling finger toward my bedside table. It is right there, next to the water pitcher. Trent picked up my phone. He turned his back to me, pretending to face the window while he supposedly checked his work portal. But the large glass window of the hospital room acted as a perfect dark mirror against the gray afternoon sky outside. I lay perfectly still in my bed, watching his reflection in the glass. I watched his thumbs move rapidly across the screen. He was not on a web browser. He had opened my text messaging application. I watched him scroll down through my entire recent conversation history. Then he opened my call log, checking every single incoming and outgoing number from the past 24 hours. He checked my email outbox. I even checked my recently deleted folder in the photo album. He was performing a ruthless, comprehensive forensic audit of my entire social life. I remained perfectly calm on the outside, breathing slowly through the pain in my ribs. I felt no fear because I had already anticipated this exact move. Long before Trent walked into the room, I had completely wiped the phone clean. I had deleted the digital receipt of the nanny camera video download. I had erased the browser history from the cloud storage login. I had deleted the initial text message I sent to my lawyer, Jessica. My phone was an absolute blank slate. It looked exactly like the phone of a woman who had been too traumatized and confused to speak to anyone at all. After 2 agonizing minutes of intense searching, Trent locked the phone screen and turned back around. The arrogant smirk was back on his face. He tossed the phone casually onto the bedside table. My manager did not send the file yet. Trent lied smoothly, checking his expensive wristwatch. I am going to run down to the hospital cafeteria to grab a sandwich and find a charging station for my phone. You get some sleep, Clara. My mother will be back later tonight to keep you company. He walked out of the room, completely convinced he had secured his fraudulent empire. He had no idea that I was already 5 steps ahead of him. He had completely underestimated my intelligence, my resilience, and my fierce determination to protect my unborn child. 10 minutes after Trent left the room, the door opened quietly. It was Sarah, the young night nurse, who had lent me her personal smartphone during the darkest hours of the previous night. She walked in carrying a plastic medical tray filled with fresh bandages and a new bag of intravenous saline fluid. She carefully closed the heavy door behind her and locked it with a soft click. Sarah was not just a nurse, she was my silent accomplice. When she had taken my blood pressure earlier that morning, before Trent and Beverly arrived with their fake chicken soup, I had made a massive, terrifying gamble. I had looked deep into her kind, tired eyes and told her the truth. I did not tell her about the stolen inheritance or the forged mortgage documents, but I told her that my mother-in-law had intentionally pushed me down the stairs. I told her that my husband was aggressively isolating me and preventing me from calling for help. I told her I was a victim of severe domestic violence and that I desperately needed a way to communicate with the outside world without my husband ever knowing. Sarah had worked in the emergency room for 6 years. She had seen the dark, manipulative signs of domestic abuse 100 times before. She had recognized Trent's controlling behavior the moment he walked into the triage unit. Without saying a single word, Sarah walked over to my bedside table. She lifted the small plastic water pitcher and slid something out from underneath the white paper napkin resting on the tray. It was a cheap black prepaid smartphone, a burner phone. I bought it at the pharmacy gift shop downstairs during my lunch break. Sarah whispered, keeping her voice so low it barely registered above the hum of the medical equipment. It is fully charged and loaded with 200 prepaid minutes. There is no name attached to the registration. Your husband will never see the billing records, and it will never connect to your shared home wireless network. Keep it hidden, deep inside your pillowcase. If you ever feel unsafe, you press the emergency button and I will have hospital security remove him from this ward immediately. Tears of genuine, profound gratitude welled up in my eyes. Thank you, Sarah, I whispered, clutching the small plastic device in my bruised hand like it was made of solid gold. You have no idea what you just did for me. You just saved my life. Sarah gave my shoulder a gentle, reassuring squeeze. You are a mother fighting for your baby, Clara. You do what you have to do to survive. I will be back to check your vitals in exactly 1 hour. She unlocked the door and slipped out of the room, leaving me alone with my new, untraceable lifeline. I waited until the hallway was completely quiet. I pulled the hospital blanket up over my head, creating a small dark tent to hide the glowing light of the screen. I powered on the burner phone and immediately dialed Jessica's private direct office number. She answered on the very first ring. Jessica, it is Clara. I whispered into the darkness of the blanket. I am using an untraceable phone. Trent just left the room. He audited my personal cell phone. He is completely convinced I am terrified and compliant. Good, Jessica said, her voice sharp, professional, and aggressively determined. I have been working non-stop since we spoke early this morning. We are moving quickly and quietly. I have successfully executed a hard legal freeze on your remaining personal assets. Your independent checking account from before the marriage, your personal retirement fund, and your private investment portfolio are completely locked down. Trent cannot transfer a single penny out of those accounts without your physical presence and a notarized signature. He is completely blocked out. A massive wave of relief washed over my aching chest. And the divorce papers? I asked, my voice steady and resolute. They are fully drafted, Jessica confirmed. I have prepared a brutal, ironclad divorce petition. I am citing extreme cruelty, financial fraud, and irreconcilable differences. I am demanding sole legal and physical custody of your daughter, along with emergency spousal support and the immediate liquidation of his personal assets to repay the stolen inheritance. But I am not filing it with the family court just yet. If I file it today, Trent will receive a legal notification, and he will instantly know we are coming for him. We keep this strictly in the shadows until we are perfectly ready to strike. What about the criminal charges against his mother? I asked, the memory of Beverly's violent shove burning fresh in my mind. I have drafted a comprehensive, devastating criminal complaint for the district attorney. Jessica explained, her tone turning incredibly cold. We are pursuing felony aggravated assault and attempted murder against Beverly. The nanny camera video is currently secured in 3 different encrypted legal vaults. I have also prepared a separate federal wire fraud and forgery referral regarding Trent maliciously falsifying your signature on the home equity loan documents. The evidence is absolutely overwhelming, Clara. When we hand this package over to the authorities, neither of them will ever see the outside of a prison cell again. I lay there in the stifling heat under the hospital blanket, feeling the incredible weight of the power I now held in my hands. I was no longer the helpless, clumsy victim lying broken at the bottom of a staircase. I was the architect of their absolute destruction. I was a mother preparing to eradicate the monsters who threatened her child. We wait, I told Jessica softly, a cold smile touching the corners of my lips for the first time in days. We wait until they feel completely untouchable. I pulled the hospital blanket down and looked across the room at the large digital calendar glowing on the wall monitor. I counted the days in my head. Chloe's lavish, ridiculously expensive country club wedding was exactly 12 days away. 12 days of enduring their smug smiles, 12 days of eating their fake soup and listening to their condescending advice, 12 days of pretending I was a broken woman trapped in their arrogant reality. I tucked the black burner phone deep inside the lining of my hospital pillowcase. Let them enjoy the next 12 days, I thought to myself, as I rested my hand on my belly. Let them buy their expensive dresses and brag to their wealthy friends. The higher they build their pedestal, the more bones they are going to break when I finally push them off. I was discharged from the hospital 4 days later. The bright morning sun felt completely out of place against the dark, heavy dread settling in my chest. Trent pushed my rented wheelchair up the concrete walkway of our home. Every bump over the pavement sent a sharp, agonizing jolt through my fractured ribs. But the physical pain was absolutely nothing compared to the psychological terror of returning to the exact scene of the crime. As Trent unlocked the front door and pushed me into the foyer, my eyes were immediately drawn to the top of the hardwood staircase. I could vividly see the exact spot where my heels had slipped off the edge. I could almost feel the phantom pressure of Beverly's hands violently shoving my chest. I had to force myself to look away to bite the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, just to keep my face perfectly neutral. Trent parked my wheelchair near the living room sofa and let out a loud theatrical sigh, complaining to the empty room about how much time he had missed at his tech office. I sat there in silence, a prisoner in my own home, acutely aware that I was completely trapped. Before I could even ask for a simple glass of water, the front door swung open again. Beverly marched into the house, carrying 3 large, heavy suitcases. She dropped them onto the entryway rug with a loud thud that made my heart race. She took off her designer sunglasses and looked around my home with the smug, entitled gaze of a conquering general. Trent walked over and kissed her cheek, thanking her profusely for making such a massive sacrifice to be here. She had the absolute audacity to look at me and smile, a cold, empty stretch of her lips that did not reach her calculating eyes. She announced that she was officially moving into our guest room for the foreseeable future. She told Trent that a woman in my fragile, clumsy condition could not possibly be trusted to stay home alone while he was at work. She claimed she needed to deeply monitor my recovery and aggressively manage the household to ensure the baby was perfectly safe. Trent praised her endlessly for her maternal devotion. He told me how incredibly lucky I was to have a mother-in-law who cared so deeply about my well-being. I had to look my husband directly in the eyes, force a weak, pathetic smile, and thank the very woman who had tried to murder me just 96 hours ago. The moment Trent grabbed his briefcase and left for his office, the suffocating illusion of family warmth instantly evaporated. The house went deathly quiet. I sat completely immobilized in my wheelchair, listening to the heavy sound of Beverly unpacking her bags in the room right next to mine. I was living inside a psychological horror movie. My attempted killer was sleeping under my roof, walking through my kitchen and controlling my entire environment. The nightmare escalated the very next afternoon. The front doorbell rang, and Chloe breezed into the house carrying a massive stack of garment bags, a clipboard, and a cup of expensive iced coffee. She did not even bother to say hello to me. She walked straight past my wheelchair in the living room and marched up the stairs to the second floor. I heard her high heels clicking loudly down the hallway, stopping right outside the door of my baby's nursery. I slowly and painfully wheeled myself to the bottom of the staircase, my hands gripping the cold metal rims of the wheels. I listened as Chloe and Beverly discussed the room layout. Chloe complained loudly that the lighting in the guest room was absolutely terrible for her bridesmaids. She declared that the nursery had the best natural sunlight in the entire house. It was the perfect space for a bridal dressing room. I felt a surge of pure protective rage flare up in my chest. I had spent months carefully painting those walls a soft, warm yellow. I had saved my own money to buy the beautiful white wooden crib and the matching changing table. It was my daughter's sanctuary, built with absolute love and anticipation. That evening when Trent returned from work, Chloe cornered him in the kitchen. She shamelessly demanded that he move the crib, the rocking chair, and all the carefully packed baby boxes down into the dark, damp basement so she could bring in full-length mirrors and makeup stations for her wedding party. I sat in my wheelchair at the edge of the kitchen, waiting for my husband to draw a line. I waited for him to defend his unborn daughter's bedroom. Instead, Trent nodded eagerly. He told Chloe it was a brilliant idea. He actually apologized to her for the inconvenience of having baby furniture in the way of her important wedding preparations. He looked over at me and casually announced that the baby would just sleep in a portable bassinet in our master bedroom for the first few months anyway, so the nursery was essentially useless space right now. I had to sit there gripping the armrests of my wheelchair, so hard my knuckles turned white, and watch my husband actively dismantle my baby's room. I watched him carry the white wooden crib down the stairs piece by piece. Every trip he made felt like another heavy nail in the coffin of our marriage. Chloe stood in the hallway, directing him like hired help, tossing small stuffed animals into black garbage bags. Beverly sipped her red wine and watched me with a victorious, mocking glare from the kitchen island. They were erasing my presence from the house room by room. They were proving that my daughter and I were nothing but temporary nuisances in their grand, luxurious lives. I swallowed my tears. I kept my face entirely blank. I mentally reminded myself that every single piece of furniture Trent moved was just another piece of evidence of their incredible cruelty. Trent would come home from work, step right over the bags of my daughter's belongings, sitting in the hallway, and ask his mother what was for dinner. He completely stopped asking how I was feeling. He stopped touching my stomach to feel the baby move. He treated me like a broken piece of furniture that he simply had to tolerate until he could figure out how to discard it. The isolation was an incredibly heavy physical weight. The house I had spent years turning into a home now felt like a cold, hostile territory. The walls seemed to close in on me every time Beverly walked past my wheelchair, humming a cheerful tune. She was incredibly happy. She was thriving on my pain and my assumed defeat. But the absolute most terrifying part of living with the enemy was the quiet, insidious, daily abuse. Beverly completely took over the kitchen. She threw away all the fresh groceries I had bought before the accident, claiming they were expired or contaminated. She took absolute control over my diet. She insisted that because of the placental abruption, I needed highly specialized nutrition that only she knew how to prepare. Every single morning, and again, every single afternoon, she would approach my wheelchair, then carrying like a tall glass filled with a dark, thick, foul-smelling liquid. She called it a traditional herbal supplement. She claimed it was an old family recipe guaranteed to strengthen the baby and speed up my recovery. But the pungent, bitter smell of the dark liquid made my stomach violently churn. It smelled like rotting leaves and metallic chemicals. I vividly remembered the chilling audio from the nanny camera video. I remembered her explicitly stating that she intended to raise my child if I did not survive the fall. She did not want me to get stronger. She wanted me weak, compliant, and ideally entirely out of the picture before the baby was born. I had no idea what toxic roots, dangerous herbs, or household chemicals she was actually crushing into those drinks. The sheer terror of being handed a glass of unknown murky liquid by a woman who actively wanted me dead was indescribable. It was a suffocating, paralyzing fear that gripped my throat every time I heard her footsteps approaching the living room. I knew I could not simply refuse to drink it. If I pushed the glass away, she would immediately text Trent and tell him that I was being ungrateful, stubborn, and hysterical. She would use my refusal as further proof that my mental state was deteriorating and that I was an unfit mother who did not care about her own recovery, so I had to play a highly dangerous, perfectly calculated game of daily survival. When she handed me the glass, I would force a weak, appreciative smile. I would bring the rim to my lips deliberately, holding my breath to block out the putrid smell and pretend to take a long, deep swallow. I would tilt my head back, letting the thick, dark liquid pool heavily in my cheeks without letting a single drop slide down my throat. Beverly would stand over me, her arms crossed, watching me with dark, intense eyes, waiting to see if I consumed her poison. The moment she turned her back to check her phone or walk back into the kitchen, I would violently spit the foul liquid into a large, opaque travel thermos I kept hidden, tucked under a thick wool blanket next to my leg. When the thermos was full, I would wait until the middle of the night when the entire house was completely asleep. I would painfully wheel myself into the master bathroom, lock the door as quietly as possible, and pour the toxic sludge straight down the drain. I would wash it away with scalding hot water, so absolutely no residue remained in the porcelain sink. I did this twice a day, every single day. I lived in a constant, exhausting state of hypervigilance. Every creak of the hardwood floorboards, every long shadow stretching down the hallway, every time Beverly looked at my pregnant belly with that cold, calculating hunger, my heart would hammer relentlessly against my broken ribs. I was entirely trapped in a suburban prison with a predator who was smiling right at me. I could not sleep for more than an hour at a time. I kept my heavy bedroom door locked when Trent was not home, dragging a chair across the floor to block the handle, just in case Beverly decided to try another accident. The mental toll of acting like a broken, submissive victim while secretly plotting my escape was draining every ounce of my energy. But every time I felt my baby kick, every time I touched the secret burner phone hidden inside my pillowcase, my resolve hardened into impenetrable steel. I counted down the days on the calendar. The lavish country club rehearsal dinner was rapidly approaching. I just needed to survive this suffocating nightmare a little bit longer. I needed to let them feel utterly invincible, so their eventual fall would shatter them completely. It was exactly 3 days before Chloe's extravagant country club wedding, and the atmosphere inside my own home had become completely unbearable. Downstairs, the living room had been transformed into a chaotic staging area for floral centerpieces, expensive silk ribbons, and endless deliveries of imported champagne. Beverly and Chloe were constantly shouting orders at delivery drivers and complaining loudly about the seating chart. Up in the master bedroom, I sat propped against a mountain of pillows, listening to the muffled sounds of my stolen inheritance being spent. My bruised ribs ached with a dull, constant throb, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I had spent the past week flawlessly playing the role of the docile, recovering wife. I took my meals in bed. I kept my voice soft and agreeable. I made sure to look absolutely terrified every single time Trent mentioned the fake medical bills he was supposedly handling for me. I needed them to feel completely invincible. Late that Thursday afternoon, the bedroom door slowly pushed open. Trent walked in carrying a thick manila folder tucked firmly under his arm. He was wearing his expensive, tailored work suit, looking every inch the successful, responsible provider. He closed the door behind him and walked over to my side of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight as he sat down next to me. I had to force my hands to remain relaxed on top of the quilt, suppressing the overwhelming urge to pull away from his physical proximity. He reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair away from my face. His touch was cold and completely devoid of any genuine affection. It was a calculated, mechanical gesture designed to test my compliance. "How are you feeling today, Clara?" he asked, his tone dripping with fake concern. You look a little pale. Are you still experiencing side effects from those heavy pain medications the doctor prescribed for your ribs? I nodded slowly, letting my eyelids droop to feign total exhaustion. I am just so tired, Trent, I whispered, making my voice sound incredibly fragile. The room keeps spinning every time I try to sit up straight, and my vision gets so blurry. The pills make me feel like I am floating underwater. Trent smiled a tight, satisfied expression that told me my performance was working perfectly. He believed I was heavily medicated and completely vulnerable. He patted my hand and placed the thick manila folder onto my lap. I am so sorry to bother you with paperwork while you are resting, Clara, he said smoothly, but the hospital billing department is being incredibly aggressive about processing our insurance claims. I spent my entire lunch break on the phone with them today. They are demanding immediate signature authorizations to officially link the baby to our updated health insurance policy and to finalize the payment plans for your emergency trauma care. If we do not submit these forms by tomorrow morning, they are going to deny our coverage completely, and we will be personally responsible for over $50,000 out of pocket. I looked down at the stack of dense text-heavy papers. My heart began to pound a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my chest, but I kept my face arranged in a mask of sleepy confusion. I reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the first document. I let my eyes slowly scan the page, pretending to struggle to focus on the black ink. But I did not need to struggle at all. I am a senior accountant. I have spent a decade of my professional life auditing complex corporate contracts, dissecting dense legal jargon, and identifying hidden financial liabilities. My brain automatically processed the words on the page with absolute chilling clarity. These were not hospital billing authorizations. These were not health insurance updates for my unborn child. What Trent had just placed in my lap was a highly aggressive, meticulously drafted post-nuptial agreement. The sheer scale of his deception was breathtaking. He had hired a ruthless attorney to draft a legal document specifically designed to completely and permanently strip me of every single legal right I possessed. My eyes darted across the paragraphs, absorbing the horrific terms, while I kept my breathing shallow and even. Clause 4 explicitly stated that in the event of a divorce, I would voluntarily waive my right to any equitable distribution of his tech company stock options, his retirement accounts, and all future earnings. Clause 6 stated that I agreed to surrender all claims to the physical property of our suburban home, transferring sole ownership entirely to Trent, but it was Clause 8 that made my blood run absolutely cold. Clause 8 contained a strict indemnification agreement regarding the home equity line of credit. The document clearly stated that I was fully acknowledging the $200,000 debt as my own sole personal financial responsibility, completely absolving Trent of any obligation to repay the money he had illegally stolen to fund his mother's gambling habits and his sister's wedding. I was actively setting me up for total financial execution. The plan was terrifyingly brilliant in its absolute cruelty. He was going to wait until I safely gave birth. Then, he was going to file for divorce. Armed with this signed document, he would kick me out of the house with absolutely no assets, no savings, and a staggering $200,000 of high-interest debt chained directly to my name. I would be completely bankrupt. I would not be able to afford a lawyer to fight him in court. I would not be able to secure housing or buy food. And because I would be financially ruined and effectively homeless, he would easily petition the family court for full physical custody of our daughter. He and Beverly were planning to steal my baby and legally leave me to rot in the streets. They wanted to destroy me so thoroughly that I would never be able to rebuild my life. Clara, Trent prompted, gently tapping his expensive silver pen against the edge of the folder. I need you to sign at the bottom of the last 3 pages. I marked the signature lines with small yellow sticky notes, so you do not have to read through all the boring legal boilerplate. It is just standard hospital liability waivers. I will take care of filing everything for you, so you can go back to sleep. I stared at the yellow sticky notes. I knew with absolute certainty that if I refused to sign the papers, if I questioned the legal terminology, or demanded to show the documents to my own lawyer, Trent would instantly realize his entire gaslighting operation had failed. He would know I was completely lucid and deeply suspicious. He would immediately panic, realize I was a massive threat to his freedom, and he could easily try to physically force me out of the house before I could secure my own legal protection. I was still physically broken. I was still trapped in an isolated suburban house with a woman who had already tried to kill me once. I had to sign the papers. I had to let him believe he had won his sick, twisted game, but I was absolutely not going to hand him the weapon he needed to destroy my future. I closed my eyes and let out a long, dramatic groan of pain, clutching my forehead with my free hand. "Trent," I whispered, slurring my words heavily for maximum effect. The words are literally jumping off the page. The pain medication makes me feel so incredibly dizzy. I cannot even read a single sentence right now. "Where exactly do you need my signature?" Trent eagerly leaned over, unsnapping the cap of his expensive pen and pressing it into my right hand. "Right here on the line, sweetie," he said, his voice tight with barely contained anticipation. "Just sign your full legal name on the 3 marked pages." I gripped the pen. My hand was genuinely shaking from the sheer adrenaline coursing through my veins, which made my performance entirely convincing. I brought the tip of the pen down to the first signature line. And then I executed my final act of forbearance. I did not sign my legal name. I did not use the smooth practice signature that was recorded on my tax documents, my driver license, and our original mortgage paperwork. Instead, I deliberately misspelled my own middle name. I purposely altered the angle of the cursive loops, making the letters look jagged, erratic, and completely disconnected. I allowed the pen to slip heavily off the line, creating a sloppy, sprawling scribble that looked exactly like the desperate handwriting of a woman who was heavily intoxicated or suffering from a severe, incapacitating medical impairment. I repeated this exact messy forgery on the 2nd page and then again on the 3rd page. Any competent handwriting expert or family court judge would take one single look at those erratic, misspelled signatures and immediately declare the legal document completely invalid, undeniably signed under extreme duress and severe medical incapacity. I let the pen slip out of my fingers and fall onto the bed sheets, letting my head roll back against the pillows with a heavy sigh. "I am so tired, Trent," I murmured, keeping my eyes half closed. Did I do it right? The lines were so blurry. Trent eagerly snatched the manila folder right off my lap. I watched him quickly flip through the 3 pages, his eyes rapidly scanning the bottom lines. He saw the signatures. He did not possess the financial or legal training to notice the subtle misspelling or the deliberate alteration of the cursive loops. He only saw ink on the paper. He only saw a binding contract that he truly believed gave him total, absolute ownership of my life and my future. He closed the folder and clutched it tightly against his chest. A massive, genuine smile broke across his handsome face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated greed. He had successfully stolen my inheritance, illegally mortgaged my home, covered up my attempted murder, and now he believed he had legally stripped me of my right to fight back. "You did perfectly," Clara, Trent said softly. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. The touch of his lips made my skin crawl with absolute revulsion. "I will put these in my briefcase and take them to the billing department first thing tomorrow morning. You do not have to worry about a single financial problem ever again. I have taken care of our entire future." He stood up from the bed, looking incredibly tall and victorious in his tailored suit. He walked out of the master bedroom, pulling the heavy wooden door shut behind him. I listened to his confident footsteps echo down the hallway. I listened as he walked right past the hidden nanny camera concealed inside the potted plant. I lay perfectly still in the quiet bedroom, staring up at the white ceiling. My heart was pounding a steady, relentless drumbeat of pure anticipation. I reached my hand under my pillow and touched the cold plastic of the secret burner phone. My lawyer Jessica had all the banking records. She had the devastating video of Beverly pushing me down the stairs. She had the drafted divorce papers and the comprehensive federal fraud complaints. And now, Trent had just provided the ultimate proof of his malicious intent to financially ruin me in family court. He thought his trap had finally closed around my neck. He thought I was his helpless prey. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed me the final match I needed to burn his entire world to ashes. The rehearsal dinner for Chloe's luxury wedding was only 3 days away. 150 of their wealthiest, most judgmental friends and family members would be gathered in one single room. I took a deep, careful breath, feeling the sharp sting in my ribs, and smiled into the empty room. They were going to get exactly the wedding celebration they deserved. The 12 days leading up to the rehearsal dinner were an excruciating exercise in psychological endurance. I lived inside my own home, like a ghost haunting the very halls where I had nearly been murdered. I forced myself to smile at the woman who had shoved me down the stairs. I forced myself to say thank you to the husband who had forged my signature to steal $200,000 of our home equity. I watched them eagerly prepare for a massive celebration built entirely on my stolen financial security. But every single time, Beverly turned her back, and every single time Trent left for his software engineering office, I was silently communicating with my attorney Jessica through the untraceable burner phone hidden inside my pillowcase. We were not just building a standard divorce case. We were meticulously constructing a devastating legal and social trap. Friday evening finally arrived. The sky over the city was a clear, brilliant blue as Trent drove us up the long, winding private driveway of the Silver Pines Country Club. This was the most exclusive, prestigious venue in the entire metropolitan area. The membership fees alone were astronomical, and securing the grand ballroom for a Friday night rehearsal dinner required a level of wealth and influence that my family simply did not possess. But Trent and Beverly had found a way to buy their way in. They had used the illegal home equity line of credit, the massive debt forged under my legal name, to purchase this temporary illusion of upper-class grandeur. Trent parked his luxury sedan near the front entrance and unloaded my rented wheelchair from the trunk. Every small jolt as he pushed me up the decorative brick ramp sent a sharp stabbing ache through my fractured ribs. I wore a simple dark maternity dress that loosely covered my 8-month pregnant belly and successfully hid the heavy medical bandages wrapped tightly around my torso. I kept my hands folded quietly in my lap, maintaining the exact posture of a weak, submissive, and heavily medicated wife. Trent leaned down and whispered that I needed to behave perfectly tonight, reminding me that the Harrison family, Chloe's future in-laws, were incredibly important people who detested any kind of social drama. I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes fixed on the ground. The moment the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom swung open, the sheer staggering scale of their financial theft hit me like a physical blow. As a senior accountant, my brain is permanently wired to calculate costs and analyze ledgers. I could not turn it off. I sat in my wheelchair at the entrance and conducted a silent, ruthless audit of the room. There were 20 massive round tables covered in imported silk linens. Towering centerpieces of rare white orchids, cascading crystal beads, and imported white roses sat in the middle of every single table. I knew the exact market rate for custom floral arrangements of that magnitude. Each centerpiece cost at least $800. That was $16,000, completely gone, just on flowers. A professional string quartet was playing classical music in the corner of the room, a booking that easily cost $3,000 for the evening. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with premium champagne and expensive caviar appetizers. The champagne alone, a vintage label I recognized, immediately retailed for nearly $200 a bottle. I was looking directly at the stolen equity of my suburban home. I was watching my grandmother's lifelong savings, the money she had earned by working double shifts for 40 years, being casually swallowed up by people who viewed me as nothing more than a disposable bank account. 150 guests filled the massive ballroom. These were not just casual friends or distant relatives. Beverly had deliberately invited the most influential and powerful figures in our local community to witness her grand social triumph. The senior pastor from Beverly's massive suburban church was sitting at the head table, sipping sparkling water and smiling warmly. Several local city council members, wealthy real estate developers, and the entire extended family of Chloe's fiancé were mingling and laughing loudly. The Harrisons were true old money. They wore their wealth quietly and spoke in measured, confident tones. Beverly, on the other hand, was parading through the crowd in a custom-tailored silver gown, practically shouting about her expensive choices, desperately trying to prove that she belonged in their elite social stratosphere. Trent pushed my wheelchair through the glittering crowd, ignoring the sympathetic, pitying looks from the few guests who actually noticed my bruised face. He did not park me at the main family table near the front of the stage. Instead, he pushed me to a small, dimly lit table near the swinging doors of the catering kitchen, completely out of the main spotlight and far away from the important conversations. He patted my shoulder with a cold, mechanical hand, told me to stay put and rest my clumsy feet, and immediately walked away to network with a group of wealthy software investors. He left his 8-month pregnant, injured wife sitting entirely alone in the shadows. It was the ultimate display of his profound disrespect. But being placed in the dark corner of the room was exactly what I wanted. It gave me the perfect, unobstructed vantage point to execute my plan. I sat there, sipping ice water, watching the room with the cold, calculating eyes of an auditor who has just found the fatal flaw in a fraudulent ledger. I reached my right hand deep into the pocket of my dark maternity cardigan and traced the smooth plastic edge of my secret burner phone. Over the past 12 days, while Trent and Beverly firmly believed I was heavily medicated and completely defeated, I had been working flawlessly with Jessica. We had not just built a legal case for the district attorney. We had built a highly sophisticated technological trap right here inside the Silver Pines Country Club. 2 days ago, Jessica had hired a highly specialized private security firm. One of their expert audiovisual technicians had posed as a routine municipal internet inspector, conducting standard maintenance on the country club network. The management never questioned his forged credentials. He had successfully bypassed the ballroom firewall and installed a completely untraceable digital backdoor directly into the main projection and sound system. He had linked that secure encrypted connection to a specific hidden application on my burner phone. I currently held absolute remote control over the massive digital projector screen hanging behind the main stage and the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers hidden in the ceiling above the guests. The lavish dinner service proceeded exactly as Beverly had planned. Plates of filet mignon and butter-poached lobster were served and quickly cleared away. The dinner concluded with a decadent chocolate dessert coated in actual edible gold leaf. I calculated another $6,000 completely wasted. As the waiters cleared the final dessert plates, the massive crystal chandeliers in the grand ballroom slowly dimmed. A soft, warm theatrical spotlight illuminated the polished wooden podium standing at the very front of the room. The low murmur of 150 wealthy guests faded into a polite, respectful silence. Beverly gracefully walked up the short steps to the stage. She looked absolutely radiant under the bright spotlight. Her silver gown sparkled beautifully. Her hair was perfectly styled. She looked like a woman completely untouched by guilt, a woman who genuinely believed she was the absolute hero of her own magnificent story. She adjusted the microphone with a practiced, elegant hand and looked out over the crowd with a smile of pure toxic arrogance. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate the upcoming union of our beautiful Chloe and her wonderful fiancé Beverly, began her voice echoing perfectly through the expensive sound system. She smiled warmly at the Harrison family table. We are so incredibly honored to merge our family with yours. Beverly shifted her posture intentionally, dropping her tone to sound deeply emotional and incredibly sincere. She knew exactly how to play a crowd. Tonight is about celebrating love, she continued, placing a manicured hand over her heart. But it is also about celebrating the profound importance of family values. Raising Trent and Chloe as a single mother was not always easy. It required noble, selfless sacrifices. It required working hard and putting the needs of my children above my own desires every single day. But I look at them now and I know that every sacrifice was absolutely worth it. The absolute staggering hypocrisy of her words made the breath catch in my broken ribs. This was the exact woman who had illegally drained my grandmother's life savings to pay off violent underground gambling debts. This was the woman who had allowed her son to forge legal mortgage documents to fund this very party. And here she was standing under a spotlight bought with my stolen money, actively demanding admiration and respect from the most powerful people in the city. "My faith has guided me through every difficult trial in my life," Beverly said, looking directly at the senior pastor, who nodded back at her with profound respect. "My faith taught me that true wealth is not measured in bank accounts or property. True wealth is measured in the pure, unconditional love of a devoted family. It is measured in how we care for the vulnerable, how we protect the innocent, and how we uphold the sacred bonds of our household." She was incredibly good at this. If I did not know the horrific truth, I would have believed every single word she said. I watched Trent raise his crystal champagne glass toward the stage in a silent, arrogant salute. I watched Chloe beam at her wealthy future in-laws, incredibly proud of her remarkably strong mother. They were completely intoxicated by their own magnificent lie. They had reached the absolute peak of their social triumph. They felt totally invincible. But Beverly did not stop there. She needed to play her ultimate, most manipulative trump card. She needed to completely cement her status as the saintly, suffering matriarch. She looked across the massive ballroom, her eyes scanning the dark edges of the room until she deliberately sought out my wheelchair in the dim corner. She pointed a delicate finger toward me, drawing the attention of all 150 guests to my bruised face. "As many of you know, our family recently faced a terrible, tragic crisis," Beverly announced, dramatically wiping a single manufactured tear from her cheek. "My sweet daughter-in-law, Clara, suffered a horrible accident. She took a devastating fall down our stairs. When I saw her lying there, I was utterly terrified. I prayed to God for a miracle to save her and my unborn grandchild." A collective, sympathetic murmur rippled through the wealthy crowd. People turned in their chairs to look at me with profound pity. "I want to publicly praise my son," Trent Beverly continued, gesturing toward him. "He has been such a strong, incredibly supportive husband during this devastating family crisis. He has carried the financial and emotional burden of this tragedy without a single complaint. He is a true provider. And I want to promise everyone in this room right now that I will be dedicating the rest of my life to helping Clara recover. I will be stepping in to help raise this new baby with all the traditional family values I hold so dear, because that is what a mother does. That is what family does." The entire ballroom erupted into loud, appreciative applause. The guests were clapping for a monster. They were cheering for a woman who had violently shoved a pregnant woman toward her death, just so she could steal a baby and cover up a massive financial fraud. Beverly stood behind the podium, basking in the thunderous ovation, soaking up the validation and the social prestige she had literally killed to obtain. She smiled down at the crowd, completely unaware that the ground beneath her expensive shoes was entirely hollow. I sat perfectly still in the shadows of the catering kitchen doors. My face remained entirely blank, totally devoid of the tears she expected me to cry. My fractured ribs throbbed with a sharp, burning intensity, but I barely felt the physical pain anymore. The roaring adrenaline pumping through my veins completely masked the agony. I slowly pulled the black burner phone out of the pocket of my maternity cardigan. I kept the device hidden carefully under the edge of the white table linen so no one walking past could see the glowing screen. I unlocked the phone and opened the specific hidden application the security technician had installed for me. The digital interface glowed faintly in my palm, displaying a single large red button. The massive blank projector screen, hanging directly behind Beverly's head, was completely active, waiting silently for a remote signal. The surround sound speakers, perfectly calibrated above her head, were ready to receive an audio override. I looked at Beverly. She was still smiling, still waving gracefully at the clapping guests, thoroughly enjoying the absolute climax of her fraudulent existence. She had successfully stolen my past. She had attempted to steal my future. She thought she had completely buried the truth. I took one final slow breath, steadying my trembling hand. I stared directly at the woman who had tried to murder my child. And then, hidden in the dark corner of the grand ballroom, I pressed the red button on my phone. My thumb pressed down hard on the glowing red button displayed on the screen of my hidden burner phone. For a fraction of a second, absolutely nothing happened. The massive grand ballroom of the Silver Pines Country Club remained perfectly still. Beverly was standing proudly behind the polished wooden podium, her face bathed in a warm, flattering spotlight, her custom-tailored silver gown shimmering as she smiled down at the 150 wealthy guests. She had just finished declaring herself the ultimate model of maternal sacrifice, a saintly woman, dedicating her life to my recovery. The wealthy, influential crowd was still offering her a round of polite, respectful applause. Then the sophisticated country club audio-visual system completely hijacked the room. The soft, ambient classical music that had been playing faintly through the ceiling speakers abruptly cut off. The warm theatrical spotlights focused on the main stage instantly snapped into complete darkness. A loud, sharp electronic click echoed through the massive ballroom, causing several guests to jump in their seats and look around in sudden confusion. Immediately following the click, the giant wall-sized digital projection screen hanging directly behind the stage flared to life with a blinding, bright white light. Beverly let out a small, delighted laugh. She stepped away from the microphone and turned around to face the massive screen, casually adjusting her expensive diamond necklace. She clearly thought this was a surprise presentation. She genuinely believed her son had arranged a touching slideshow of childhood photos or a beautiful video montage celebrating Chloe and her wealthy fiancé, Trent, who was sitting at the head table with a crystal glass of expensive vintage champagne in his hand, sat up straight and looked around the room, an expression of mild confusion crossing his handsome face. He had not authorized a video presentation, but it was not a slideshow of happy family memories. The crisp, high-definition footage from my hidden hallway nanny camera filled the enormous screen, magnifying the image so large that every single detail was impossible to ignore. The bright morning sunlight of my suburban home illuminated the screen. The highly sensitive audio feed from the camera activated, pumping the ambient, quiet sounds of our house directly through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers positioned all across the country club ceiling. A collective murmur of confusion swept through the formal dining tables. The senior pastor from Beverly's church frowned, leaning forward to get a better look. The wealthy Harrison family, Chloe's future in-laws, stopped their quiet conversations and turned their full attention to the stage. They were expecting a heartwarming family tribute. Instead, they saw me marching aggressively into the camera frame, clutching a printed bank statement tightly in my right hand. I watched the recorded version of myself from my dark corner near the catering kitchen doors. I remembered the exact suffocating panic I had felt in that moment. On the massive screen, Beverly appeared at the very top of the wooden staircase. She was wearing her floral silk robe, holding a delicate porcelain teacup, looking down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disdain. The sheer scale of the projection made her smug, arrogant facial expression visible to every single person in the country club ballroom. "Where is the $100,000? My recorded voice demanded the audio, echoing sharply off the high-vaulted ceilings of the country club. "I asked you a direct question, Beverly. Where is my grandmother's money?" The wealthy guests sitting at the tables suddenly stiffened. The polite, comfortable atmosphere of the rehearsal dinner instantly evaporated, replaced by a thick, heavy tension. People exchanged shocked, bewildered glances. This was not a sweet family montage. This was an incredibly private, highly volatile confrontation being broadcast to the most influential members of their social circle. I saw Trent physically drop his crystal champagne glass. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered into a dozen pieces, the sharp sound of breaking glass cutting through the heavy tension in the room. Trent's face drained of all color, transforming into a mask of pure, absolute terror as he finally realized exactly what was playing on the screen. On the video, the recorded version of Beverly snatched the bank statement from my hands and aggressively threw it onto the floor. The camera perfectly captured the cold, venomous hatred burning in her eyes. It captured her looking quickly down the steep flight of wooden stairs, physically measuring the dangerous drop to the bottom floor. And then, her voice boomed through the expensive surround sound speakers. The audio was crystal clear, completely undeniable, and absolutely terrifying. "This house is mine." Beverly's recorded voice hissed, dripping with pure malice and entitlement. "Trent is mine. I took that money to pay for Chloe's wedding. And I will raise this child if you do not survive this fall." A loud unified gasp of absolute horror erupted from the 150 guests. It was a sound of profound collective shock. Women covered their mouths with their hands. Men sat frozen in their chairs, their eyes wide with disbelief. The wealthy patriarch of the Harrison family, James Harrison, slammed his hands down flat onto his dining table, his face flushing dark purple with immediate outrage. Beverly stood completely frozen on the country club stage. The warm, saintly smile she had worn just moments ago entirely vanished, replaced by an expression of raw, paralyzing panic. She looked exactly like a cornered animal caught in the harsh glare of a spotlight. Her skin turned chalk white. Her mouth hung open in a silent, horrified scream as she listened to her own voice, loudly confess to massive financial theft and premeditated murder. She slowly backed away from the giant screen, her hands trembling violently, looking out at the sea of disgusted faces staring back at her. And then, the most damning moment of the entire video played. The massive screen showed Beverly raising both of her hands. It showed her planting her palms flat and hard against my upper chest, and with a brutal, forceful, incredibly violent thrust, she pushed me. The country club guests watched in absolute breathless horror as my recorded self violently lost balance. They watched my feet slip rapidly off the edge of the top step. They watched me disappear completely from the frame, tumbling backward into the empty void of the stairwell. The loud, sickening, repetitive thuds of my heavy, pregnant body hitting the hardwood stairs echoed brutally through the ballroom speakers. The horrific sounds were immediately followed by my own muffled, agonizing groans of pure physical pain from the floor below. Someone in the crowd screamed. Several guests jumped out of their chairs, instinctively reacting to the horrific violence they had just witnessed. But the video was not over. The hidden camera remained fixed firmly on Beverly. The massive screen showed her standing perfectly motionless at the top of the stairs for 3 full seconds. The entire country club watched as the woman who had just preached to them about maternal sacrifice and noble family values calmly looked down at my broken, bleeding body. They watched her reach up with a remarkably steady hand and casually adjust the collar of her silk robe, completely unbothered by the horrific crime she had just committed. They watched her seamlessly transition from a cold-blooded attacker into a theatrical screaming victim, wailing my name and faking absolute devastation. "Shut it off!" Trent suddenly screamed, his voice cracking with sheer frantic desperation. "Shut that screen off right now!" He scrambled violently over his dining chair, knocking over expensive floral centerpieces and pushing past horrified guests as he lunged toward the main stage. He threw himself at the polished wooden podium, frantically tearing at the audiovisual cables hidden underneath. He ripped wires out of the soundboard, his face sweating and pale, desperate to kill the video feed. But Jessica and I had planned for his exact reaction. The security technician had completely bypassed the physical podium controls. The video feed was locked deep inside the country club's secure digital network, broadcasting directly from my hidden burner phone. No matter how many cables Trent ripped out of the wall, the video simply reset and began looping from the very beginning. My voice echoed through the room again, demanding to know where my grandmother's money had gone. "You stole it," a booming, authoritative voice shouted over the chaos. James Harrison, the wealthy, influential patriarch of Chloe's future family, pushed his chair back with immense force and stood up at the head table. I was a man who commanded absolute respect in the business world, and his face was currently twisted into a mask of total, unadulterated disgust. He pointed a firm, accusatory finger directly at Beverly, who was currently cowering near the edge of the stage, visibly shaking and hyperventilating. "You sat in my home, drank my wine, and bragged about your family wealth," James Harrison roared, his voice cutting through the panic of the ballroom. "You told my wife you were paying for this entire lavish wedding out of your own successful investments. You lied to our faces. You are nothing but a common violent thief who stole a young mother's inheritance to fund a pathetic fake lifestyle." "Mr. Harrison, please," Beverly sobbed, holding her hands out in a pathetic gesture of begging. "Please, it is a manipulation. That video is somehow edited. Clara is a very sick, confused woman. She is trying to ruin us." "Do not insult my intelligence." Beverly James Harrison fired back, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "We all just watched you attempt to murder a heavily pregnant woman with our own 2 eyes. We heard you explicitly confess to stealing $100,000 to pay for this very party. I will not have my family name associated with violent criminals and financial fraudsters." He turned his furious gaze toward his son Daniel, who was sitting frozen next to a wildly sobbing Chloe. "Daniel, we are leaving this establishment right this second," James commanded his son. "This wedding is completely and permanently canceled. There will be no union between our family and these absolute monsters. Get your coat." "No, Daniel, please!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail of pure devastation. She grabbed her fiancé by the arm, her expensive makeup running down her face in dark streaks. "Please do not do this. It has nothing to do with me. I did not know they stole the money. I just wanted a beautiful wedding. Please do not leave me." Daniel looked at Chloe, then looked up at the massive projection screen where the video of Beverly pushing me down the stairs was playing for the third consecutive time. He physically recoiled, pulling his arm out of Chloe's desperate grasp with a look of profound revulsion. "I am sorry, Chloe," he said quietly, shaking his head. "My father is right. Your mother is a monster, and your brother helped her cover it up. I cannot marry into this madness." He turned his back on her and quickly followed his father toward the exit. The rest of the Harrison family immediately stood up from their tables, grabbing their coats and expensive purses, casting glaring looks of pure disgust at Trent and Beverly. The senior pastor from Beverly's church stood up, shaking his head in silent, profound disappointment before walking away. The illusion of their grand elite social status was entirely shattered. They were completely exposed, publicly ruined, and socially annihilated in front of every single person they cared about impressing. Trent was still standing on the stage, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster unfolding around him. He looked out at the fleeing guests, his hands running through his hair in absolute disbelief. He looked exactly like a man watching his entire life burn to the ground, realizing he had absolutely no water to put out the fire. And then the heavy, ornate mahogany doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom swung open with immense force. The flashing red and blue lights of multiple police cruisers reflected brightly against the tall glass windows of the country club lobby. A team of 6 uniformed police officers marched aggressively into the ballroom, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. Right behind them walked 2 plainclothes detectives wearing sharp suits and carrying thick manila folders. And leading the entire group, looking like an absolute avenging angel in a tailored black suit, was my brilliant attorney, Jessica. Jessica scanned the chaotic room with sharp, calculating eyes. She immediately spotted Trent and Beverly standing paralyzed on the main stage. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at them, signaling the officers to move in. "Beverly Jessica," announced loudly, her voice carrying the undeniable weight of absolute legal authority, "you are completely finished. The district attorney has reviewed the unedited video evidence and the medical reports detailing Clara's severe placental abruption and fractured ribs." 2 uniformed police officers quickly ascended the short stairs to the stage. They did not offer gentle instructions. They approached Beverly with strict professional aggression. Beverly let out a high-pitched scream as an officer grabbed her wrists, pulling them firmly behind her back. "Beverly, you are under arrest for felony, aggravated assault, attempted murder, and severe elder financial abuse regarding the stolen inheritance funds," the arresting officer stated clearly, reciting her Miranda rights as the cold metal handcuffs clicked loudly and securely around her wrists. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Beverly was violently sobbing now, her knees buckling under her. As the officers physically held her upright, she looked absolutely pathetic, a far cry from the smug, arrogant woman who had force-fed me herbal poison in my wheelchair just hours ago. She was being publicly frog-marched off the stage in handcuffs, her expensive silver gown dragging across the country club floor in total disgrace. Trent watched his mother being arrested, his eyes wide with sheer panic. He took a hesitant step backward, looking frantically for an exit, but the 2 plainclothes detectives immediately stepped into his path, blocking any chance of escape. "Trent," one of the detectives said, pulling a folded legal document from his jacket pocket, "we have a federal warrant for your arrest." Trent's jaw dropped open. "On what possible charges?" he stammered, his voice trembling violently. I did not push her. You saw the video. I was not even in the house. I am completely innocent. You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, interstate financial deception, and felony forgery. The detective explained, his tone completely devoid of any sympathy. We have absolute, undeniable digital proof that you maliciously bypassed remote notary protocols to forge your wife's legal signature on a $200,000 home equity line of credit. We also have the verified banking records showing you systematically drained a protected inheritance account to funnel money to an illegal gambling syndicate. Trent's face went completely slack. The arrogant confidence, the gaslighting superiority, the condescending lectures about fake medical bills, it all instantly vanished. He realized with absolute crushing certainty that his trap had not caught me at all. He had blindly walked straight into mine. He had eagerly signed a post-nuptial agreement, trying to saddle me with the fraudulent debt, completely unaware that Jessica already had the federal authorities pulling his IP addresses and server logs. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, the detective ordered firmly. Trent slowly turned around, his shoulders completely slumped in absolute defeat. The detectives placed the heavy metal cuffs on his wrists, securing them tightly. I sat quietly in my wheelchair in the shadows, my hand resting protectively over my pregnant belly. I watched the police escort my husband and my mother-in-law out of the grand ballroom in handcuffs, marching them past the shocked, whispering country club guests and out into the flashing lights of the waiting police cruisers. The heavy, suffocating weight that had been crushing my chest for the past 12 days finally lifted. The psychological horror movie was officially over. The monsters were locked away, and I had successfully protected my daughter's future. I took a deep, steady breath of the cool country club air, savoring the absolute perfect taste of justice. The weeks following the dramatic and highly public arrests at the Silver Pines Country Club were an absolute whirlwind of legal depositions, criminal investigations, and family court appearances. I never returned to that dark suburban house where I had nearly lost my life. My brilliant attorney, Jessica, arranged for me to stay in a beautiful, secure apartment downtown while we systematically dismantled my husband's fraudulent empire piece by piece. The absolute silence of my new living space was the most profound comfort I had ever known in my entire adult life. I no longer had to sleep with a heavy wooden chair propped against my bedroom door. I no longer had to pretend to swallow toxic herbal supplements prepared by a malicious woman who desperately wanted to steal my child. I was finally breathing free air. But the true absolute justice came inside the cold, oak-paneled walls of the county courthouse. Beverly faced a grueling criminal trial for felony aggravated assault and attempted murder. She walked into the courtroom every single day, wearing conservative knitted sweaters and long skirts, trying desperately to look like a frail, harmless grandmother who could not possibly hurt a fly. She instructed her expensive defense attorney to paint me as a hysterical, highly emotional pregnant woman who had simply slipped on a polished stair and was now seeking vindictive financial revenge. But Jessica had meticulously coordinated our evidence with the district attorney. When the prosecution finally played the hidden nanny camera footage on the large screens for the 12 members of the jury, the entire courtroom went completely deathly still. They watched Beverly brutally shove me down those steep, hardwood stairs. They heard her cold, venomous voice declaring that she would raise my child if I did not survive the terrible fall. They saw her casually adjust her expensive silk robe, while I lay groaning in agonizing pain on the floor below. Beverly broke down sobbing on the witness stand, begging the judge for mercy. She claimed she was under immense financial stress from her underground gambling debts and was simply not thinking clearly when she pushed me. The judge looked down at her from the bench with absolute, unadulterated disgust. He told her clearly into his microphone that her actions were some of the most calculated, purely malicious, and profoundly selfish he had seen in his entire career in the justice system. He brought his heavy wooden gavel down and officially sentenced Beverly to 7 full years in a state penitentiary. There would be no early parole for good behavior. There would be no comfortable house arrest in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I sat in the front row of the gallery and watched calmly as the bailiff placed her in cold metal handcuffs. She turned to look at me as they led her away toward the holding cells, but I did not look away. I held her gaze with the absolute unbreakable strength of a mother who had successfully protected her young from a predator. The monster who had tried to erase me from existence was now just a state inmate number, locked away behind concrete walls and heavy steel doors for nearly a decade. Trent faced a completely different kind of absolute total destruction. His criminal trial for federal wire fraud and felony forgery systematically dismantled every single aspect of his arrogant, comfortable life. He actually stood in court and tried to play the role of the tragic victim. He tried to claim that he forged my legal signature on the $200,000 home equity line of credit simply to protect our family finances from his mother's dangerous creditors. He tried to argue that he was just a loving son trying to save his family from violent loan sharks. But the digital forensic evidence was completely undeniably bulletproof. The federal court saw exactly how he had maliciously manipulated the online remote notary system using his advanced software engineering credentials. They saw the staggered daily transfers from my private inheritance account directly into his mother's hidden checking account. Because of his felony convictions for severe digital financial fraud, the state engineering board permanently and completely revoked his professional software engineering credentials. He was immediately and publicly fired from his lucrative, high-paying tech job. No reputable technology company or financial institution would ever hire a convicted fraudster to manage their secure digital networks again. He was completely professionally ruined. But the absolute final nail in his coffin came during our divorce proceedings in family court. Jessica presented the judge with the horrifying postnuptial agreement Trent had tried to force me to sign in my hospital bed while he believed I was heavily medicated and legally incapacitated. The family court judge was absolutely appalled by his extreme predatory behavior. The judge completely invalidated the fraudulent postnuptial agreement on the spot. Trent was officially ordered by the court to assume the entirety of the $200,000 home equity debt entirely in his own name. Furthermore, he was stripped of all his remaining personal financial assets, his retirement accounts, and his personal vehicle to fully repay my stolen $100,000 inheritance. He walked out of the financial settlement hearing completely bankrupt, drowning in massive high-interest debt, and permanently unemployable in his chosen field. The most important and beautiful victory of all happened when the family court judge ruled on the permanent custody of our daughter. The judge explicitly stated in the official court record that a man who actively colluded to hide the attempted murder of his pregnant wife was a severe, profound, and ongoing danger to his child. Trent was permanently stripped of all his parental rights. I was completely denied any form of visitation. He was legally and entirely erased from our daughter's life, just as he had so callously tried to erase me from his. He lost his impressive career, his stolen money, his beautiful home, and his entire family, all because he chose greedy, malicious loyalty to his toxic mother over his sacred vows to his wife. As for his completely spoiled sister, Chloe, the glamorous country club wedding of her dreams, transformed into a spectacular, humiliating public nightmare. The wealthy Harrison family entirely severed all ties with her the very night her mother and brother were arrested in handcuffs in the middle of the grand ballroom. Her wealthy fiancé completely blocked her phone number, packed his belongings, and entirely vanished from her life. But Chloe had arrogantly signed multiple binding catering, floral, and entertainment contracts, assuming my stolen inheritance would permanently cover the massive luxury bills. When the fraud was publicly exposed and the stolen money was legally frozen by the federal authorities, she was left holding the bag for tens of thousands of dollars in canceled event fees and non-refundable deposits. Chloe instantly became a complete social pariah in our city. The influential church members and wealthy country club guests who had witnessed the dramatic arrest absolutely shunned her. To avoid being sued into total financial bankruptcy by the furious wedding vendors, Chloe was forced to desperately sell every single one of her expensive designer handbags, her luxury high heels, and her custom jewelry on cheap internet auction sites. She had to move out of her expensive apartment, and she now lives in a tiny rented room, working a minimum wage retail job at a local shopping mall. She is completely consumed by the deep public community, shame her family so carelessly created. She wanted the wedding of the century, and she ended up with nothing but debt and total humiliation. A few short weeks after the criminal trials concluded, my beautiful baby girl finally arrived. She was born perfectly healthy and completely safe, with bright, curious eyes and a strong, loud cry that filled the hospital delivery room. It was a completely different hospital experience than my last one. There were no toxic mother-in-laws hovering over my bed. There were no manipulative husbands shoving fake legal documents into my hands. There were only kind nurses and the profound, overwhelming joy of meeting my daughter. As I held her tiny warm body against my chest, listening to her steady, perfect heartbeat, I thought about how incredibly close I had come to losing this incredibly precious moment forever. I named her after my fierce, hardworking grandmother, the wonderful woman whose carefully saved money had ultimately provided the key to our total freedom. We were no longer trapped in a suburban nightmare. We were no longer silent victims to someone else's greed. With Jessica's brilliant and ruthless legal intervention, I fully regained every single dollar of my stolen personal assets. We legally sold the dark suburban house where the nightmare had originally taken place, forcing Trent to sign over the property deed to cover his massive legal and financial penalties. I took my grandmother's fully restored inheritance and the financial proceeds from the property sale, and I bought a beautiful, completely new house in the bright, sunny suburbs, entirely in my own name. It is a wonderful safe home filled with wide, clear windows, glowing natural sunlight, and a massive green backyard, surrounded by old, strong oak trees. My daughter's new nursery is painted a cheerful, warm yellow, exactly the way I had always dreamed it would be. There are no dark, steep staircases in this new house. There are no heavy, locked doors. There are no toxic, dangerous secrets hiding in the guest room down the hall. There is only profound peace, total safety, and absolute unconditional love. Every morning when I wake up and walk into my kitchen to make my coffee, I feel an incredible sense of deep, lasting liberation. I am the sole owner of my life, and nobody will ever take that away from me again. I look back on that terrible, terrifying morning at the top of the stairs, and I realize how incredibly easily I could have just surrendered to their abuse. I could have let their relentless gaslighting make me actually believe I was crazy and clumsy. I could have let their fake sympathy and their false promises lull me into a quiet, permanent submission. I could have accepted the role of the broken wife and allowed them to dictate my entire existence. But I refused to let them write the ending to my story. I chose to fight back in the dark, and I won my life back in the light. I learned a profound, difficult lesson through this agonizing journey that I will carry with me for the rest of my life and teach to my daughter when she is old enough to understand. Never let resignation and misplaced trust rob you of your right to be a mother and your right to be a human being. Personal boundaries must be protected at all costs. When people show you exactly who they are through their cruel actions, their selfish entitlement, and their greedy lies, you must believe them immediately, without hesitation. You cannot love a toxic person into becoming a good person. You cannot sacrifice your own physical and mental safety just to keep the peace in a family that views you as nothing more than a disposable financial resource. Sometimes the absolute bravest, most loving thing you can possibly do for yourself and your innocent children is to quietly gather your evidence, build an impenetrable legal fortress of truth, and walk completely away from the people who desperately want to destroy you. Do not let them convince you that their abuse is your fault. Do not let them silence your voice. You deserve to live in the bright, warm light. You deserve to be completely safe in your own home, and you absolutely, inherently deserve to fight back and reclaim your future. If you have ever experienced deep manipulation or devastating betrayal from someone you completely trusted, please share your own story of survival in the comments below. We gain incredible, immense strength from hearing how each other managed to survive the darkness. Which state are you watching this video from right now, and at what time? Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all your notifications so you never miss another story of absolute justice and total survival. See you soon.